Mobius pick here, guys. The allergies have stopped attacking me as brutally, so I am ready to do our limited review of Shadows over Innistrad. There's a lot to talk about here. We're going to start with white. We're going to move through the colors, and then we're going to hit the dual face cards, multicolored, colorless, and lands. So we're just going to start off. I'm going to be telling you guys about the rating scale. We have A, B, C, D, and F. And there are plus and minuses on there to give you a little bit of wiggle room. A's are the kind of cards that are either just straight up bombs that will win you the game when you pick them and play them, or hyper efficient cards that serve a really, really strong role. Sometimes you'll see that for like unconditional removal at 2 or 3. That's really, really efficient and does the things you don't normally get at any other point. B's are usually going to be high picks, often first picks, cards that want to pull you into a color, cards you're excited about playing. Something like a Grasp of Darkness would be considered a strong B, even though it's just a piece of removal, or maybe a strong flyer, like a 4/4/4/5 would be another kind of card that's a B, because it's such a strong power and toughness for the mana cost. C's are the cards that you're going to get tons of. They're the cards that are kind of in the middle. Your deck's usually going to be comprised mostly of C's, and it's not a bad thing to have C's in your deck. You just want to make sure that, hopefully, during your draft or sealed, you got some amount of B's and maybe an A or two as well. D's are the cards that tend to be situational, or just not something you quite want. Maybe like an aura that you have to play that's fine if it succeeds, but auras have that inherent risk of 2-for-1ing yourself, or maybe a creature that's just a little bit below par, that 3 mana 2/3. That's probably part that 3 mana 2/2 with an okay ability that you're not excited about. That's where your D pluses are in. When you start getting to the D and D minuses, that's really fringe cards that you really would rather not to play. Hopefully you don't play the whole set. And then Fs are cards that you will likely never play, something that might spell that changes something's color, or Graveyard Hate, or something like that. Although, in this set, something like Graveyard Hate's more relevant, so those cards will be rated higher. So we're going to get started. If you guys have any questions or comments, you guys can ask on the side. Remember, you can also reach us at mobiuspick@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to respond to you there. Alright, guys. So I'm going to start off here, alphabetically, and with white. Always Watching is 1 white for an enchantment, and it's rare. Non-token creatures you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. This is a pretty strong card. I'd be happy to put it in most of my decks. Even decks that have some amount of tokens are still going to want this card, because most of your creatures are 9-token. Vigilance is relevant for being able to attack and block well. White has some amount of evasion, which helps as well. Having, even something like a 2/2 flyer that can attack and block in the air is pretty powerful. Remember that 2/2 would be a 3/3. I would not run really, really bad creatures with this. I would not run 1/1s for 1 and hope to make them 2/2s for 1 later. This is better just making your 2s into 3s, 3s into 4s, 4s into 5s, etc. I think that this is, for me, is somewhere around a B+. I think I'll always play it. I'll be excited to play it. There's very few cards I would pick over a card like Always Watching. Anthem effects tend to be very strong. Angel of Deliverance is 6 white for a 6/6 flying angel. It has Delirium, which is if there are 4 more different types of cards in your graveyard, that effect's active. If you have Delirium, exile, or whenever the Angel of Deliverance deals damage, any damage, combat or non-combat, exile target creature and opponent controls. Now usually you're just going to be dealing combat damage. By the time you have 8 mana, you're probably going to have Delirium, so that's usually on. The real question is, do you want to pay 8 for a 6/6 flying that exiles your opponent's creatures? And that's pretty strong. They're usually going to block if they can. So it's just killing a flying creature, but otherwise it's removing their best threat. It's a very powerful card. For me, I think it's still probably just a B+, and a lot of that is riding on the 8 mana. It is worth 8 mana. This card is strong enough for 8 mana. You almost have Delirium by then. The problem is, all decks don't play 8 drops. It's the kind of 8 drop that'll win you the game usually, but also, if your opponent is in a position where they just need to attack to kill you, this only blocks one creature. This is nice in the scenarios where your opponent has an overwhelming board and they're slowly getting ahead, or they're getting close to that point where you're going to die, because you only have to attack a couple times and either they block or they're losing giant chunks of life, and you're getting rid of their most threatening creatures. So it can do a lot of work. This might just be a B for me and not even a B+, just because 8 is so much. Alright, we're getting to our first really interesting card here. Angelic Purge is 2 and a white for a common sorcery. As an additional cost to cast, sack a permanent, exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment. So this answers anything relevant in limited. You're not really going to see that many planeswalkers, and exiling lands is not an effect you want to see either. So this gets rid of basically anything at the cost of 2 cards for you, which is a pretty big downside, but the upsides to this card is it helps enable a Delirium. You are usually sacrificing a land to this if you are playing it after you hit your curve top, which means you have 2 types in for Delirium, which is a bonus. If it's a creature that's outlived its usefulness, same deal. Creature with a negative enchantment, same deal. Sometimes you can use it with things like clues. It doesn't help your Delirium then, but it turns essentially a later draw a card effect into an instant, or right now removal effect. This is a sorcery because they didn't want you using it in response to removal. They wanted this card to be tempered. It also has the advantage that if you are in the white deck that wants Delirium, or a deck that wants Delirium that has white in it, this card goes up quite a bit. If you don't want Delirium, this card is probably like a C-, like maybe a C. I would like to have one in every white deck I play. Just having unconditional removal is great. And the fact that it exiles is very relevant for many cards and Delirium. But when you want Delirium as a white deck, this card shoots up to probably like a C+ for me. I'd be happy to have maybe up to 3, which is quite a bit for a card you'd sacrifice with. But the effect's pretty strong too. Where you don't want to be with this card is killing their 4 mana card or their 3 mana card, because then you're really behind. This is a universal removal spell, but it's one that you really want to try to save for a big target. Alright. Apothecary Geist is 4 and a white for a 2/3 flying spirit. When it enters the battlefield, if you control another spirit, you gain 3 life. This card's fine. People have been rating it lower and higher. For me, I think it's probably just a C+. And that seems weird because the life gain's conditional and all that, but I think a 4 mana 2/3 flyer is going to be quite good in this format. They block well, they attack okay, but without being excellent on that point. But I think the stats are right, and that's why it gets such a high nod from me. In many sets, this could be as low as just a C. I will also say this is some of my favorite art I've ever seen on a card. Like, just some fat bartender guys bringing you over some magic, like, ghost beer. Looks like, Danzig for the undead. But anyway, Bound by Moonsilver is 2 and a white for an enchantment aura, uncommon. Enchanted creature can't block, attack, or transform. That doesn't just include werewolves, that's all transformation abilities. Sack another permanent, and you may move Bound by Moonsilver to another target creature. Only activate this as a sorcery, and only once each turn. So it's like an rest in many ways. To me, this is probably a B+ at 3 mana. Being able to lock down any creature is great. Being able to sacrifice another permanent to lock down the new best creature they played is awesome as well. And having the ability to sacrifice things is a really, really important ability in this set. Being able to sacrifice things that you want to die, that you want to add to your Delirium. There's a lot of different effects that really benefit from the sacrifice clause. So I think so far, Bound by Moonsilver is the strongest card we've seen so far. That I would be... Maybe it's the Anthem. It's hard to say. They're really at that neck-and-neck level of extremely strong cards. Bygone Bishop is 2 and white for 2/3 flying Spirit Cleric. Whenever you cast a creature spell with converted mana cost 3 or less, investigate. Now, when you investigate, we put a colorless clue artifact token on the battlefield with 2 sack it, draw a card. So what this investigate does in general is it lets our decks have a lower converted mana cost. If we have a deck that caps out at 4, one of the downsides is once we start hitting higher amounts of mana, they're essentially not very good. they're not doing as much. We're really just going to play a 3 or 4 power, or 3 or 4 converted mana cost worth of spell each turn after we empty our hand out. Clues let you use that extra mana and get more cards and get more effects. So if you can cast, 2 more cards throughout a game because of 2 clues, that's pretty strong. You essentially drew 2 more cards. Well, you did draw 2 more cards, but you drew them when it was convenient for you. So you can spend that mana whenever you have the extra mana. You can play your 3-drop and sack a clue on the 5th turn when it makes sense. You can leave up a removal spell, and when they don't attack into it, you can sacrifice a clue, and you didn't lose that tempo. So clues are pretty good in a small to moderate amount. The problem is if you have 10 clues, you're not going to use 10 clues. So clues do lose a value after a certain amount of time. I actually really like Bygone Bishop. You're probably playing a solid amount of cards with converted mana cost 3 or less, and he draws you more cards, so you could possibly draw even more from that. I think Bygone Bishop for me is my first A-, and I think I like it better than any other cards, just because with Bygone Bishop, you can pick it early and build a deck that kind of generates a lot of cards to go with it. He can very easily chain into 4 or 5 clues, so he's drawing you 4 or 5 cards throughout the game, and if they're cheap cards, you can usually play them, right? If you're on turn 5 and you play your 3-drop, you drop a clue, or you get the clue from the Bygone Bishop, you sacrifice the clue, you draw a land, and the next turn you draw another 2-drop, well then you play that 2-drop, sacrifice the clue, and if you get another 2-drop, it keeps going, so it chains together quite well. And his base stats are solid too. Alright guys, let's go to the next one. Cathar's Companion is 2 and a white for a 3/1 hound. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gains indestructible until end of turn. So it's kind of a weird prowess. 3 and a white for 3/1 is unimpressive. I don't like that card. But this set will play more instants and sorceries than most sets. So the fact that you're playing a higher amount of non-creature spells than normal because you want to activate Delirium makes this card slightly better. I don't think it's better enough for me. The only time I even like it is if you have a lot of combat tricks, but then I don't really want to be running 3/1s because they're vulnerable. So for me, this is like a C-, maybe even a D+. It's a creature that I would rather not want to run at all. Chaplain's Blessing. White. Sorcery. You gain 5 life. Couple different points here. Life gain by itself is almost never worth it from your main board. Out of my sideboard, I might bring in Chaplain's Blessing against some sort of burn deck or a deck with a lot of racing potential in it. It's fine-ish, but not great. The really time that you're bringing this in is if you desperately need Delirium and you don't have enough sorceries, because it's a card you can discard Delirium, or if you have to cast it. So for me, this is like a D. I don't usually want to play it, but I can see situations where this would be playable. Usually a card like this would be an F. You would almost never play it, or a D-. But due to Delirium, it's better than normal. Dauntless Cathar is 2 and white for a 3/2 human soldier. That's close to playable already. That's probably in the C- range. 1 and a white, exile it, put a 1/1 spirit token on the battlefield, activate this ability only anytime you could use a sorcery. So these cards, you're going to see a cycle on white of cards that exile themselves from the graveyard and give you 1/1 spirits. I think that's a really strong ability. Now, you're not getting them on the same time for the board, so it's not like you're getting a 1/1 immediately. It does cost you mana, it does cost you resources, it's not instant speed. All that said, the fact that you could trade your 3/2 with one of their 3 toughness creatures, which is probably costing them 3 or 4, and then you get a white token is okay. But the fact that you're going to probably have multiple cards that get you white tokens let you amass sort of a flying force to press through damage. So for me, I think Dauntless Cathar is a solid C. Declaration in Stone is 1 and white. Sorcery. Exile target creature and all the creatures it controls with the same name. That player investigates for each non-token creature exiled this way. You can use this to get rid of tokens for nothing. You can use this to get rid of their creatures for usually 1 clue. I like this card a lot. It is unconditional removal in many senses. They do get a clue, but if you're getting rid of their bomb, a random card is always worse than their bomb. If you are in an extremely aggressive deck putting enough pressure on them, they may not have time to use the clue. And that's where I think this really shines. For me, I think this is probably another B+. It's super solid removal. If it was instant speed, it would be an A range for me. I'm always happy to have it in a white deck. Descend Upon the Sinful is 4 white for a mythic sorcery. Exile all creatures. Delirium, put a 4/4 white angel with flying on the battlefield. It's a wrath effect. It's slower than you usually see. It doesn't cost 4, it doesn't cost 5, it costs 6. So, it's a lot slower. It's not going to save you from aggressive decks. But it has the upside of potentially giving you a 4/4 flyer. And a 4/4 flyer is already worth 5 mana. So if you have Delirium, you're paying 1 mana for a Wrath Exile effect. Exile can be pretty relevant as well. I like this card, but you need to make sure that you're not counting on this to stop really, really aggressive decks by itself. The fact that it gives you the 4/4 really pushes it up for me. So I think that Descend Upon the Sinful is a card to be happy to have in basically any of my white decks. You do need to be able to activate Delirium to make this an extremely strong card, but even as a reset button, it's pretty powerful. For me, it's an A- because these kind of effects are so good when they're good, and if you don't need them, you're probably already in a good enough situation that it's fine to have drawn a card that's kind of dead. Devilthorn Fox is 1 white for a 3/1 Fox. I think it's solid. It's a C for me. It trades up well. It's a better blocker than attacker because the high power means that it blocks better than attacks, but on a clear board, it can do some damage. Drog Skull Cavalry is 5 white for a 4/4 flying Spirit Knight. That's underwhelming. When it enters the battlefield, whenever another spirit enters the battlefield, you gain 2. 3 and a white, put a 1/1 spirit on the battlefield. This does not go in any deck. You need to make sure that you have a deck that's going to go long. If you go, 7 mana into 8 mana, you do get 2 1/1 white spirits, which is fine, and you gain 4 life, which is impressive. So this card is helping lock down the board, but it takes at least 2 turns or 11 mana, which you're not usually going to have. So it can help you get out of a bad situation. The problem is 7 mana for a 4/4 flyer the turn you play it is not getting you out of a bad situation. There's a lot of things I like about this card. Playing it on turn 7, turn 8 making 2 1/1s, gaining 4 life, chump blocking 2 of their creatures, and being able to attack them for 4. The things I don't like about this card just mostly have to do with the cost. For me, I think that this is like probably a B-. There's a deck to be built around it. It definitely can slow down your opponents. It can put you in positions to win the game, but your deck has to commit to having that mana and getting to that point and not being dead the turn you play it. You probably won't die the turn after. Once you start activating that ability once or twice a turn, you've probably locked up the game unless they can kill the Drog Skull Cavalry. Eerie Interlude is 2 and a white. Instant. Exile any number of target creatures you control. Return them to the battlefield under the owner's controller at the next end step. So you can do a couple things with this. First and foremost, you can give all your creatures bad vigilance. Bad vigilance is fine. You can save a creature from combat. That's also fine, right? You can attack with all your creatures. Your opponent makes some good blocks. You Eerie Interlude some of your creatures that were going to die no longer die because you choose which ones they were. And you get through some good trades. That's fine. Your opponent plays a removal spell on a creature you would like to save quite a bit. You can save it there too. That said, this is just a kind of bad combat trick overall. Like, you should rate this like a combat trick, and I'm going to. I'm going to give Eerie Interlude a C, a C-. It's hard to say, but this is just a combat trick that doesn't add power, that doesn't add toughness, and that can affect your creatures as you choose. So read that into what you will. I'll be interested to try it out. Emissary of the Sleepless, 4 and a white for a 2/4 flying. That's already pretty solid. It's not super great. One of the commenters here is pointing out that you can use Eerie Interlude in response to a board wipe. And that's true, but the only board wipe is a 6 mana board wipe, and you're not normally going to, you are not going to have 9 mana, so you can't use Eerie Interlude and then board wipe your own stuff. But I wouldn't play this card in my deck in the main board to play around board wipes. If I saw a wipe, I would be happy to bring in Eerie Interlude. but I'm not going to pick Area Interlude in response to board wipes for limited. We had the constructed discussion before, and I think Area Interlude is a lot better of a card in constructed than limited, but in limited it is just simply a combat trick that is interesting and flexible and not that powerful. But if you do see board wipes, then yes, it goes up quite a bit out of your sideboard. Emissary of the Sleepless is a 2/4 flying, and when it enters the battlefield, if a creature died this turn, put a 1/1 spirit creature with flying in the battlefield. I like how they brought Morbid back without making Morbid a main keyword. That's cool. I like that flavor position. Innistrad, I like if a creature dies, you get 3/5 of stats of flying for 5, which is fine as well. For me, this is just a C. I will be happy to run one of them, and I wouldn't like to run too many because that's a lot of toughness and not a lot of flying power, but put over 2 bodies can also be relevant. Alright. Ethereal Guidance. 2 and a white for sorcery. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. This card is an archetype card. It goes in one specific deck, and that specific deck is the Flying Token Spirits decks. Your go-wide decks, the ones with decent amount of evasion, because they're usually Flying Spirits, are going to appreciate this deck. There's also the Devil cards, the 1/1 Devils, that when they die you get to do 1 damage or something, and they're fine as well. So if you end up in a go-wide deck, Ethereal Guidance is basically Swarm Surge. It's fine to run. It's not great to run. It's going to fit in that deck. You'll get it late. For me, it's like a D+, or a D. In the right deck, it'll be good, but in most decks, you're just not going to play it. Expose Evil, 1 and a white. Tap up to 2 creatures instant. At that point, that card's only going in very few aggressive decks. It's not very good, but there's one more line of text, and that is Investigate. And now this card is playable in a lot of decks. You can play it in your aggressive deck to get damage through early, and then later, draw a card, right? You can pay 3 white, tap 2 creatures, draw a card, essentially, that turn, which is fine. And in the slower, more controlling decks, you can afford to play Expose Evils because you're going to draw the game out, and having the ability to tap down their creatures to prevent damage early, and then draw a card later when you have the mana, is pretty powerful. I actually like this card quite a bit. I mean, all that said, it's still like a C-. I'm not usually going to run it most of my decks, but I will not be cringing to run it in an aggressive or a more controlling deck because of the flexibility of Investigate. Interesting card. Griff's Boon. White. Giant, weird swan centaurs attack you. Know. White. Enchantment Aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and flying. 4 and a white. Return this from your graveyard to the battlefield. Attached to target creature. Activate this only as a sorcery. It says it's an enchantment, but it's actually an equipment. Cool parts of this card. Helps Madness. Helps Delirium. You can discard it and use its effect later. Sits in your graveyard as a enchantment for Delirium until you have another enchantment. Bad sides about this card is that I do not want to play an equipment that costs 1 to play and equips for 4. The first time it equips for free, but I don't normally want to play this card. I would play 1. It's moderate inevitability because it gets flying multiple times. But you really got to think, do I want 4 mana to equip +1/+0 and flying? It's a bad kite sale. So it's like a C- for me. Like, maybe a D+. I think it's a D+. I don't think I want to run one of these. I don't really want to run any of these. But I will run the first one if I need that evasion. But I just rather not run such a small effect. Hope Against Hope. 2 and a white. Enchantment Creature Aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control. So it grows on go-wides. And as long as it's a human, it has first strike. I think in go-wide strategies, this can be okay. And I think the big part of that is that you can just slap this onto a 1/1 Spirit Flyer, and it can do quite a bit of damage. That said, it's an archetype card. I don't want to play it in any deck outside of that one. There's not actually too many humans that I'd want to be putting this on usually, just because I'd rather have it on an evasive creature than a human. So maybe it's like another D. I think it's a D outside of the one deck that wants to play them, which is the go-wide Spirits deck. Humble the Brute, 4 and a white, instant, destroy target creature with power 4 or greater, investigate. I don't like this removal particularly. I didn't particularly like Smite the Monstrous, and this is more expensive. It's nice that it's instant speed removal. There are decent a bit of high power creatures, especially the ones that flip from the werewolves. And investigating does mean you get to kind of recoup and that, but the mana cost is really high. You're paying 7 mana in installments, but turn 5, kill the big creature is nice, but they don't always even run big creatures. I would probably run one of these max main board, and I'd be happy to have 1 or 2 sideboard. I mean, that said, it's like a C probably for removal, just because of the mana cost. It might be a C plus because of the instant speediness, but it's a little odd in that you don't want to run a lot of them, and usually I want to run quite a few C pluses. So maybe it's a C. Interesting card. We have to see how the format plays out more often. If it's slower and you see more 4-power creatures, then Humble the Breed's better. Inquisitor's Ox is 3 and a white for a 2/5 Ox. That's already fine-ish. Delirium, it gets +1/+0 in Vigilance. It becomes a 3/5 Vigilance for 4. That's really good. So if your deck is playing to have Delirium, I would be happy to be running up to like 3 or 4 Inquisitor's Ox, just because it's so hard to attack into or block profitably a 3/5. Especially with the Vigilance, meaning that it can get the damage in that you need to get in. For me, I think this is a C in non-Delirium decks and a C plus in Delirium decks. Inspiring Captain is 3 and a white for a 3/3 Human Knight. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+1. It's a fine card. It was great in Origins. I think here it'll just be merely okay, because I think it'll be a lot slower. Creatures will have more toughness. It obviously shines in the Go Wide decks. Another card that, for me, is just a solid C. It will let you usually get 1 damage or 1 attack through with some other creatures that you couldn't normally get through the turn you play it. And it blocks pretty well. It's a 4-mana 3/3. Militant Inquisitor is 2 and a white for a 2/3 Human Cleric. And it gets +1/+0 for each equipment you control. Now, they're not equipped to, which is a big plus. You can equip them to your other cards. The unfortunate part is there's not that many good equipment. If the equipment deck comes together, in the equipment deck, this card will probably be like a B-, just because like a 3-mana 4/3 is pretty good. But usually you're getting a 3-mana 2/3, which is not terrible, because this can pretty easily become a 3-mana 3/3. I think in the normal deck it's just a C. So it's anywhere from a C to a B-, which I think is pretty powerful. I could be overrating this card based on how the equipment plays out, though. Moorland Drifter is 1 and white for a 2/2. Delirium, it has flying. It depends on how good a 2/2 is in this format. I think there's enough high toughness creatures that it's not great, so I have this at C-. That said, if 2/2s are better, this card could go as high as a C+. Alright, and we have a series of cards that essentially have off-color activations instead of the dual-color cards, which makes them easier to splash. You can play this in a mostly... So Wacko, one of the commenters Wacko is asking, is white-black the Delirium deck? I think Delirium can be played in any color combination. The thing that you need for Delirium to be good is you need the payoff cards. And then you have to work to find ways to get into the graveyard, whether that's self-mill, whether that's discard, whether that's sacrifice, or whether that's combat. There's also artifacts and enchantments that help out as well. Every color has Delirium cards. So you need to make sure you have the cards that want you to have Delirium, and then pick up the cards that pay you off for having Delirium. Just like the processing theme, except I don't think it's limited to 2 colors. I think that the aggressive Delirium deck is much more limited. I think that that's probably not going to be every single color, but it's really based on the Delirium cards themselves. I don't think Delirium is an archetype that's limited to the colors. I think it's more of an archetype that's spread out along the colors. Nahari's Machinations is 1 and white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, your target creature gains indestructible end of turn. That effect is not good enough on its own. That just means that you can attack your 3/3 into their 3/3, but as soon as they have a 3/4, it's not a good card anymore. 1 and a white, 1 and red, it deals 1 damage to target blocking creatures. Okay, well that's a little bit more interesting. Expensive, but can let you attack through some creatures. I'm not sure if I'm even mainboarding this card at first. I actually don't like it much, just because it's an expensive way to try to get through some amount of damage. But the nice news is, if you have some amount of cards that really want to get through or high power, low toughness creatures, it picks up a little bit. For me, I think it's like a C-. It'll have some homes in some decks, for the most part, that deck's not coming together. Nearheath Chaplain, 3 and a white for a 3/1 lifelink human cleric. I like that already. Gaining me some life, trading with a good card. 2 and a white, exile it, put 2/1/1 spirits in the token. So this is a bigger version of the other cards we saw. You get 2/1/1 white creatures, which is already worth 3 mana on its own. You have to play the 4 mana spell up front unless you discard it, in which case you're just paying 3 to get 2/1/1 white creatures with flying, which is fine. So I think that this is one of the more premier white uncommons. For me, I think that this is a solid B because there are lots of different modes. Mode 1 is play a 4/4, trade with something, gain some life, get 2/1/1s. Mode number 2, which I like a lot more, is mill or discard this card for gain, obviously, and then you can just cast the spell from your graveyard. It's essentially a flashback spell then with a different second mode. Alright, Not Forgotten, 1 and a white sorcery. Put target card from a graveyard on the top or bottom of its owner's library. Put a woman's spirit onto the battlefield with flying. The fact that it says creature means that you're not really keeping them off Delirium long. Putting a bad creature back on top of their library is fine, but it's not great. Putting your best bomb from your graveyard on top is okay, but not great. So I really don't like this card much at all. Some people are saying they like it quite a bit. I think it's more of a sideboard-oriented card, or if you're a really heavy tempo deck, for me it's just a D. Odric Lunarch Marshal, 3 and a white. For 3/3 at the beginning of combat, creatures you control that have first strike. If you have a creature that has first strike, all your creatures get first strike. Same thing for flying, death touch, double strike, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, reach, sculpt, trample, and vigilance. It's fine. Goes well if you have the sort of go wide deck because there's a lot of flying spirits, get your team flying. But it's not amazing because often this is just a 4 mana 3/3, and a lot of those abilities aren't good enough, or you're not going to have. Like, you'll usually be able to have some excess. If you have flying, it's good. If you have vigilance, it's okay. If you have lifelink, it's good. But, you know, reach isn't that great. Sculpt varies. Trample varies. So, it just really depends on your deck. I don't think he's the card I pick highly. It's probably like a C+ for me in pick order. But in your actual deck, it could be much worse or much better. Open the Armory is 1 and a white sorcery. Search your library for an aura equipment. Reveal it. Put it in your hand. It's fine. There's not any equipment good enough to play this card, and there's not any auras good enough to play this card. So for me, it is like a D minus. I'm just not going to play it. Paranoid Parish Blade, 3 and a white for 3/2. Human Soldier. That's fine. That's already in the C minus, C minus range. Delirium, it gets +1/+0 and first strike. Okay, well, when this has Delirium, this card's like a B minus or a B. It's a 4/2 first strike. That's a really strong card, even late in the game. So transitions from a card that's fine to play early. Playing turn 3/3/2 is good. But then later, the 3/2 becomes bad. The nice part is, much later, this becomes a 4/2 first strike, which is great. And does pretty good attacking. If it can't attack, it can hold back many block. It blocks in a way that holds back many attackers. So for me, I think this is C+. Puncturing Light, 1 and a white, instant. Destroy target attacking and blocking creature with 3 or less power. It's a good reprint. The 3 matters a lot more than 2, so it lets you kind of stop a much higher caliber of creatures. So for me, this is B minus. I'll be happy to run 2, maybe even 3 of these in the deck. Most creatures have 3 or less power in general. The only thing it doesn't do is kill bombs, so you need to be aware of that, but it does work well in response to combat tricks. It doesn't work well when your opponent plays a combat trick. Reaper of Flight, Moon Silver, 3 white for 3/3 flying. That's solid. Delirium, you can sacrifice another creature to give it +2/+1 until end of turn. You can do that any amount of times, too, so you can just sacrifice your board, then swing in for a ton when they're tapped out. 5 mana 3/3 flying is okay. We saw that on our Surge card before. It was alright. It's like a C. This is probably also like a C. The Delirium effect is strong, but the Surge effect of the other card was a little bit better. I just don't think this card's that great overall. I would definitely be happy to run the first one because it has flying, but I'm not going to want to run 2 or 3 3/3 flyers if I can avoid it for 5. Silver Strike is 4 and a white. Destroy target attacking creature, you gain 3 life. It's an instant. I'm going to first say, normally I don't like 4 mana tricks, especially ones that are defensive, because your opponent can just play around them. They can just attack with a bad creature. They can just attack with 2 bad creatures. They can attack with all of their creatures, and then your trick's not as good. Like, there's a lot of spots where they can make this a worse card. But clues make this card much better. If I'm in a situation where I just have a clue, and I keep open Silver Strike, and my opponent's like, you know what, I'm not attacking your obvious trick. I'm just going to attack with my bad 2/1 with flying, and getting 2 damage, and keep my 6/6 back. I gotcha. And you're like, okay, sacrifice the clue. You lost 2 mana, and that you didn't play Silver Strike, but what you gained was you got another card. And if you are in a heavy clue deck, then things like Silver Strike can pick up even more value. So Silver Strike in a deck without clues, or ways to use your mana without mana sinks, probably like a C+. I would be pretty happy to run the first one. I probably might run the second, but definitely not running any more. And the removal is very conditional. Silver Strike in a deck with a lot of clues, it's like a B. It might be like a B+, just being able to be like, okay, well, you didn't attack. End of turn, sacrifice 2 clues, draw 2 cards, play a card that makes more clues. That's really strong. Spectral Shepherd is 2 and a white for a 2/2 flying. Okay without being great. 1 in a blue, return target spirit, including this one, you control to its owner's hand. Oh, well, now this card's a lot better. If you can play this on turn 5, if you can play this for 2 and a white and keep 1 in a blue open, it's an unkillable 2/2. It can block and return to its hand. It can... And that's a really strong play, too. If your opponent attacks with a 20/20 flyer, you can block and return this to hand and cast it again. This will blank one of their best cards for 5 mana. That's not its optimal case, but it's an option. And the fact that it can return any spirit means you can make some really interesting blocks and attacks. I think I have this card as a solid B. Its ability is often underrated. Of being able to return stuff to your hand. Now, you has to be spirits. You have to have the blue mana open. There's a lot of tricky parts to it, but the payoff is very high on that kind of card. Stern Constable, 1 for 1. Discard a card, tap a creature. This is like a D-, F+. I mean, I can't imagine wanting Delirium or Madness enough that I want to discard my cards to tap stuff down, so I'm out. Strength of Arms, 1 mana, instant. Target creature gets +2/+2. Until turn. I'm already happy. That's the kind of 1 mana trick that I will just play. So that's already like a C for a combat trick. 1 mana combat tricks are great because they fit in well in your curve. You can play your 4-drop, leave 1 mana open, have a trick. And people don't usually play around 1 mana tricks because it's so hard, because 1 mana is so easy to leave up. It's so believable that you only had a 4-drop on turn 5. If you control equipment, you get a 1/1 soldier token on the battlefield. That's nice too. It's still to be seen if the equipment's good enough. I would not run equipment for this card. If I had enough cards that cared about equipment, this card would be slightly better, but I'm sticking with my C. Survive the Night, 2 and a white. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Indestructible. Investigate. 3 mana trick is kind of expensive. It does investigate, which gets you a card later, which is kind of nice, but this is not the kind of trick I usually want to run. Does save your creature, which is also another big plus. And the +1 damage means it can sometimes trade up. But I think it's just a D+, a trick I don't want to run. Tenacity, 3 and a white. Instant, creatures you control get +1/+1, lifelink, and untap them. It's really good in the go wide strategies. Otherwise, I'm not particularly impressed. It's really good in a race, but it's not particularly great in any other point. So it's another C- combat trick for me. Thalia's Lieutenant, 1 and a white for a human soldier, 1/1 rare. When it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 creature on each other human. Whenever a human enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 creature on this. It's nice. A lot of it has to do with how many humans you have. I would have to do a count to see, on average, how many humans you're getting. But you really only have to get 1 or 2 humans for it to be good. Playing it later, you probably have 2 or 3 humans out. Playing it early, you're probably going to play 2 or 3 humans. So it's okay either way. The human density of your deck really depends on how high it would go. I would start this out at a C+. Has high potential, but it's not going to be consistently performing. Thrapin Inspector, 1 for a 1/2. Traditionally, this would be a bad card. Traditionally, I wouldn't play this card. Traditionally, I would tell us we're going to ignore this card. But the fact that it has Investigate and that there's a go wide strategy means a lot more. The fact that I can play my Thrapin Inspector on turn 1, have my clue, and then block my opponent's creature or trade or get any kind of card, or even, I don't get a card if I just use the Investigate clue to get a card later, and add my first creature in, a creature that is essentially a slight tempo play to get to Delirium quicker, it's fine. Not great. So for me, I think this is like a C-, but it does have places to be played. And traditionally, this card would be like a D. Doppelgeist is 1 for a 1/1 flying. When it enters the battlefield, tap target creature opponent controls. That plays well in an aggressive deck. I would be happy to play that card in just a straight-up aggressive deck. To, turn 1, I can just start attacking with a 1/1, which is fine. And later in the game, I can tap down a creature to get through damage, which is also fine. So it is already established that I'll play this card in an aggressive deck. Delirium, at the beginning of your opponent's upkeep, tap target creature that player controls. So if you have Delirium, you tap down their best creature every turn, prevent them from attacking or blocking with that creature every turn. So if you have an ability to get Delirium, this is a great card. If I had a Delirium deck that was slower, I would consider Doppelgeist. If I was an aggressive deck that could occasionally run Delirium, but not even always, I would still run Doppelgeist. I think Doppelgeist is like a C+. I know it's a weird spot for it, but that Delirium ability is extremely powerful. And a lot of that hinges on the Delirium ability itself. Unruly Mob is 1 and white for a 1/1 human. Whenever another creature dies, put a 1/1 counter on it. It's a reprint. Fine. It grows. It's Rot Shambler. It's better in the token decks. It's better when you're trading, and trading's going to happen more often because of Delirium, but I'm an eye on it. C- for me. Last card, Vessel of Etheria. 1 and a white for enchantment. 2 and a white, sack it, put 2 white creatures onto the battlefield. You can do that instant speed, you can do that anytime you want. That means you can activate a card towards Delirium. And I think that's the biggest gain for this card, because I do not think that paying 5 mana in installments is worth 2 white creatures. But if you are playing a Delirium deck, this is a card you're going to want probably 2 to 3 of. So in general, it's a C- just because of how expensive it is. And the Delirium deck is probably like a C+, and I'd like to have 3. Alright, let's go to the next color. Blue! Broken Concentration, 1 blue, counter target spell, Madness, 3 and a blue. It's cancel with upside, and I don't really like it. So it's like a D+. I don't like playing counter spells in draft. I like it more in sealed, but still not terribly exciting. It is nice that you can Madness it for less intensive mana costs. Catalog, 2 and a blue, instant, discard 2 cards, then or draw 2 cards, then discard a card. It is a good Madness enabler. If you don't have Madness, then it's just card selection, because you're getting rid of 2 cards to get 2 cards, which is not great. But the fact that it's an instant is also nice. It plays well with clues, plays well with Madness. It's the kind of card that's going to enable a lot of different strategies. It helps out Delirium as well. I think I have it as a C. I'd be happy to usually play 2 of those. Compelling Deterrence is 1 on a blue, instant, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Then they discard a card if you control a zombie. Solid. It is important to remember that discarding stuff can help your opponent via Madness or via Delirium, but in general, I will just play this if I'm playing a deck that wants a bounce spell, and it's a little extra better if you have a zombie. On the whole, making your opponent discard is better than not. Your opponent's not usually going to have Madness, and they're not usually going to be a card away from Delirium. Confirm Suspicions is 3 blue, counter target spell, investigate 3 times. It's a weird card. I like that you investigate 3 times. That's almost excessive because it takes so long to get all those cards back. But it's a really high payoff for a counter spell. I'm not really familiar with counter spells that do stuff like this. Like, this is counter target spell, draw 1 card the next 3 turns, essentially, or something weird like that. Plays well if you have other instants, but you don't want to run too many. I could definitely see pulling this in against a really high-costed bomb that you wanted to counter because it gets you so much advantage. I really don't know how to rate it, so I'm going to give it a C+, but it could be unplayable. I don't really know. Weird card. Deny existence. 2 and a blue. Counter-target creature spell. If it's countered this way, exile it. It's nice. Much more relevant and limited than constructed. Your opponent mostly plays creatures. That's mostly what you want to play. Or things that counters creatures, and the exile effect is quite relevant against several cards, not just for delirium effects, but also due to sort of graveyard-esque effects that pop up pretty frequently. We saw some in white. So for me, I think this is probably a C. You probably run the first one, maybe the second. Drownyard Explorers, 3 and a white for a 2/4. When it enters the battlefield, investigate. I like this a lot. 4 mana 2/4 is a good defensive card, and investigate wants you to be more defensive. And being able to have these more defensive cards gives you more time to investigate. They kind of or spend your clues, so it kind of cycles well. It's a card that plays well with itself and with other slower cards. It's a solid C. I'm not going to run too many of them, but the first 1 or 2 I'm pretty happy with. Might be a C+. Maybe a C+. Draw new Corpse Trawler. 3 and a blue for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, put a 2/2 black zombie token creature into play. 3 and a black, target zombie gains death touch. I like this. For me, this is a B-. Makes 2 bodies. It can kill 2 creatures. You're getting 3 power and toughness for 4 mana, which is only okay. But it's across 2 bodies, and it can give your creatures death touch. And if for some reason it's returning to your hand or from your graveyard, which are very feasible things to happen, it'll give you more bodies repeatedly. So it's a good source of pseudo card advantage. Engulf the Shore, 3 and a blue, instant. Return all to their hand. All creatures with toughness less than or islands you control. Powerful spell. Can play well against your opponent's combat tricks. All sorts of different things there. Doesn't stop their biggest creatures because you're not probably mono blue. But it's good against aggressive decks. I think it's more of a sideboard card than anything else. I don't think I would mainboard this usually. Epiphany at the Drownyard is X and a blue. Instant. Reveal the X +1 cards of your library. Separate it to 2 piles. Your opponent chooses one of those piles. You put that pile into your hand, other into your graveyard. Ooh. So if you pay 2, X is 1 and blue is 1, you get 2 1-card piles, or however you want to set that up, and you get a card. They get to choose, so it's like bad selection, but you get 2 cards in your graveyard. This is a really good Delirium enabler. Around the 4 or 5 mana point, it's really powerful. You can play it early if you absolutely have to, and you can play it late for pretty good advantage. I like it quite a bit just because you're going to get so many cards out of it. I think this card is a B+. I'd be really happy to have it just because you can play it whenever you need to. Like, if you look at your hand and it has 3 lands and Epiphany and it curves 3 up, then you just play Epiphany on 2 if you think that you just need to be the beatdown. But if you don't, you can play it on turn 8 for 8 mana and get 4 cards in your hand and 4 cards in your graveyard, which is really strong. Urdual Illuminator, 1 and a white for a 1/3 fly. That's good enough. That card already is a card that I will play consistently because it blocks well and it can go in for chip damage. Whenever you investigate for the first time, investigate again. That's an extremely powerful ability. You only have to do that ability once for this card to have gone from a C to C+. And I think you will usually, in the decks that investigate, get to use this ability 2 times, maybe 3. The card's not a priority to kill, and it's also not easy to kill. You have to use a pretty good removal spell to kill a 3 toughness creature. So for me, I probably have this at a B-. I really like it. Essence Flex. Blue. Exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield. If it's a spirit, put a 1/1 counter on it. It's fine. It blinks your creature, saves it from something. I'm not excited about it. It's a D. If your deck's heavily spirits, it's kind of like a bad combat trick as well. Fleeting Memories, 2 and blue. When it enters the battlefield, investigate. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. This is an interesting card. You can self-mill with it. So if you're playing a Clue Delirium deck, this card will enable it well and quickly. If you're playing a really grindy Clue-based deck, you might be able to mill them as well. This is a build-around card. And as far as build-arounds go. Just depends how many clues we can get. If we can get enough clues consistently, this card will be very powerful. Because it's basically saying, whenever you draw a card and spend some mana, you're milling your opponent, but you're getting more cards to spend more mana. So you probably have to be able to put the deck together around it. But the fact that it's an enchantment is pretty strong. So I like it quite a bit. I'll be interested to try the deck, regardless if it's good or not. Forgotten Creature, 3 and blue for a 3/3 Skulk. So remember, that means it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power, which is pretty good because as a 3/3 it means it would be hard to kill that way, but it can be double blocked. So 2/2/2s can gang up and kill it pretty well. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may discard all the cards in your hand. If you do draw that many cards, very powerful. For me, I think this is another B+. Lets you turn all your extra lands or cards that aren't good into other cards. The May ability means you won't kill yourself quickly, and being able to activate things like Delirium Well are pretty powerful. So it's a really good enabler card. Furtive Homunculus, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 Skulk. It's alright. I'm not excited. C-. Gets through okay, but, you know, 1/1s can kill it. That's the real problem I have with it. Geralf's Masterpiece. 3 blue for 7/7 flying. Zombie horror. It gets -1/-1 for each card in your hand. You probably only have 1 or 2 cards at that point anyway. So it's going down as a 5/5 or a 6/6. And 3 and blue, discard 3 cards, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This is really nice, especially in Limited, because if you know that your deck's curve starts at 5 or 6, you can just hoard up lands once it's dead to rebuy back. You can keep 1 or 2 lands in your hand and keep it as a 5/5 attacking and blocking until your opponent kills it, and then immediately on your draw step, draw your card, pay the 4, and bring it back to the battlefield. For me, this is a solid A-. It's very strong. It doesn't necessarily lock the game out immediately, but it's super resilient. And that's the part I love about it. I could see going as high as an A for a card like that, really. Ghostly Wings, 1 and a blue. Aura. Enchanted creature has +1/+1 flying. Not good enough yet. Discard a card, return enchanted creature to its owner's hand. Still not good enough for me. Unless I have Madness Enablers or really need Delirium, I'm not running this card. It's fine for Delirium in that it gets an enchantment and another type in your graveyard. So for me, it's another D+ D card. Gone Missing, 4 and a blue. Put target permanent on top of its owner's in library. Investigate. I like this card. Essentially, buys you a lot of time, costs your opponent a lot of mana, costs you a lot of mana, and you drew a card and cost them a card. So it's a 2-for-1 at 5 mana. I like it. I'll run the first one pretty often. I don't think I'll run ones past the first one, so for me it's like a C-. But I'll be really happy to have that first one in mini decks. Invasive Surgery, blue, counter target sorcery spell, Delirium, search through everywhere, and get rid of all the copies of that card. This is a constructed card. Sideboard, whatever. Alright, the new Jace! Jace, Unraveler of Secrets. 3 blue for a 5 Loyalty Planeswalker. +1, scry 1, draw a card. That's the premier ability on this guy. Scry 1, draw card's a really good ability, too. You're going to dig deep and quickly to your strong cards. 2, bounce a creature. Any creature. Bouncing a creature's pretty solid. It can get you out of a lot of tricky situations. The fact that you can go bounce, and then the next turn bounce, and then scry is a lot of tempo. So I really like that ordering. The -8, which you won't get to too often, is whenever your opponent casts the spell for each turn, the first one, counter it. Stops your opponent from countering your spells for the most part, and stops them from playing spells every turn. They'll probably play spells every 3 turns on average or something like that. It's fine without being great. The good parts for him is that you can scry 1 and you can draw a card, which means if you're ahead, you're gonna stay ahead usually. And if you're behind, you can, if you have any defensive pressure, bounce, and scry and draw. And hopefully by that point, you have some amount of cards to stop them. Oh, wait, did I miss something on Ghostly Ring? Okay, someone was saying Ghostly Wings can punch through damage. It can. It gives you flying. Now, You can also enchant their creature and return that creature to their owner's hand if you have a flyer and their flyer is keeping back your creatures, which is an interesting way to do that. But I don't want to run a card that is generally not worth a card. I would much rather run an unsummon, and I don't think the option of unsummon their creature for 2 cards, give one of your creatures +1/+1 flying, and maybe protect your card poorly adds up to a card I usually want to play. But it does have a lot of different modes. It has a lot of flexibility, so that card could be better than I'm first reading into it. Jace is an A. It's a solid card. If you're ahead, it's going to keep you ahead. If you're at parity, it's going to crush them in card advantage. And if you're behind, it at the very least is bouncing 1 card and keeping you alive for 1 turn, which, while not great, is not what usually is going to happen. Jace's Scrutiny is 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature gets -4/-0 and until end of turn, and investigate. I like this card a lot. And just like I talked about the white card before, I don't think that this card would be playable without the investigate, even at just blue. Or even if it's a 2 target creatures. But the fact that the card later gets you another card means that in your slow deck, in your blue-green clue deck, or your blue clue deck, or whatever you're playing, turn 2, you can say, okay, well, I'll save myself 4 life, or maybe it's turn 3, or whenever, right? You just save yourself 2 or 4 life, and then later you investigate and draw a card. But when you have the synergistic abilities to have multiple cards that chain into small investigations, it means that when your opponent makes a decision not to attack, you can sacrifice those clues. Yeah, Mistress, I am reviewing specifically for Limited, and not for anything else. Right now, we did a constructed review a couple days back with Brad, and we just talked about the cards that are really strong for constructed. We didn't cover every card, but I'll be covering every card for Limited. But as the high upside for Jace's Scrutiny is your opponent attacks with a 4/4, you play Jace's Scrutiny, you block with your 2/2/2s, their creature dies, you investigate, you draw a card, you got a 2-for-1 out of a 2-mana spell. But the low end is prevent 4 damage, draw a card for 4. Not great, but fine. Alright, Just the Wind is 1 and a blue. Return target creature to its owner's hand, instant. And Madness for blue. I like this card. If you have ways to activate the Madness, it's even a little bit better. If I didn't have ways to activate the Madness, I probably wouldn't play more than 1. Maybe not even the first one, just because bouncing the creature is fine, but not great. Because your opponent doesn't usually play that many auras, and it's not usually worth it just to save your own creature. But when you can Madness it, you're gaining quite a bit more of an advantage. Because when it's Madness, you're not just saving the mana that's important. When you discard a card, you're usually gaining an effect. You're not usually just discarding for no gain. When you choose to discard a card due to a card that you have that says discard, you gain a positive effect. And the 2 small positive effects usually line up to a card that's worth itself. So outside of Madness, it's probably like a C-. Inside of Madness deck, somewhere probably around a C. I'd probably run 2. Lamplighter of Selhoff, 4 and a blue for a 3/5 horror. Zombie horror. When enters the battlefield, if you control another zombie, draw a card, then discard a card. 5 for a 3/5 is fine. The looting is where this is really shining in that it's going to activate your Madness, but it costs 5, and that is a really big cost. So it's going to be hard to play an expensive or strong Madness spell and the Lamplighter on the same turn. So that's a little bit of nice tension there. It helps out for Delirium as well. And the blue-black zombie deck has some amount of recursion from the graveyard, which is good. So I think overall this card's like probably a C, maybe a C-. I don't like to pay 5 mana for my defensive creatures. I like them to come out sooner rather than later. I'd rather have a 4-mana 2/4 than a 5-mana 3/5. And that's not always the case. Sometimes I'd be happy to pay another mana for another +1/+1. But when it comes to defensive speed, how quickly a creature can get down and start blocking, I would usually just rather have a creature that blocks faster than a creature that blocks bigger creatures. Manic Scribe is 1 in the blue for an 0/3. Enters the battlefield. Each opponent mills 3. Delirium, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, they mill 3. Upsides to this card is it's a win condition, and it blocks okay. Downsides of this card is it's going to activate Delirium on them very quickly, so if they have a Delirium deck, you can be helping them out. You need to be in a dedicated sort of mill deck for this to happen. The good news is, if you are in a mill deck, some of those effects you're going to be able to mill yourself, so Delirium for you shouldn't be too hard to get. This is more, again, another build-around card. There is a mill theme in this set. If you can make the mill deck happen, it's pretty solid. If I wasn't playing the mill deck, I would not play this card unless I absolutely had to. Like, I just had to have a 3 toughness blocker. So for me, it's like a D. Nagging Thoughts, 1 in a blue, and Sorcery. Look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put one into your hand and another into your graveyard. Madness for 1 in a blue. I like this card a lot. I like that you can play it on turn 2, and you usually will, because there's not much else to do. Unless you're playing a small creature. But if you're playing a defensive deck, this can be your 2-drop. It usually gets 1 or 2 different Delirium effects in, right? If you need the land on turn 2, this will usually get you a land by looking at 2 cards. If you don't need the land, it puts a land in your graveyard, which is one of the harder types to get for Delirium. And that you can Madness it to get some small amount of extra effect is a pretty big bonus, and it's only 2 mana. I think it's a C-. I don't even want to run that many. I was talking about how good the card is in itself, but I don't think I want to run more than 1 or 2, and I would be just as happy not running any if I had a good curve. Nephalia Moondrakes is 5 blue for a 5/5 flying. Is not quite good enough on its own. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gains flying. It's trying to clean up the game pretty quick. 4 blue, exile this card from your graveyard. Creature you control gain flying. I like that last ability pretty well too. Either side of this card is not worth the mana on its own. Both these cards together makes a card that's pretty solid. I think it's like a B-. It is a big flyer. It will win you games. 7 mana is a lot. But there's also games where, even if they just kill it, you might be able to still just pay 6 and attack with the other creatures to win the game. So it has a lot of good spots. Its expensiveness is putting it to me for a B or a B-. Nimbus of Dusk, 2 in a blue for a 2/1 flying prowess. I like that card. It's a solid card. It's a C. Ongoing Investigation, 1 in a blue. Enchantment, whenever 1 or more creatures deals combat damage to a player, investigate. So you can investigate probably once per turn if you have an evasive threat. That's really good in sort of a weird kind of way. 1 in a green, exile a creature card from your graveyard, investigate, you gain 2 life. Also, weird and mana intensive and kind of nice. There's a blue-green clue deck, and it's very slow, and it's very grindy, and this card goes well into it. I'm not sure if it's worth the mana, but if I had some amount of flyers or unblockable creatures or skull creatures, I think being able to just investigate whenever I attack is almost worth it there. So I think this card's like a C+, but I tend to like grindier decks in general. You know, for me, something like Baloth Null is a A-, when in reality the card's more like a B. So I could be overrating this. This card could be as low as a C-. Pieces of the puzzle, 2 in a blue, sorcery, reveal the top 5 cards, put 2 instant sorceries into your hand, the rest into your graveyard. It's not normally going to be playable. If you have enough sorcery and instants and need Delirium, sure, but it's like a D-. Pour over the pages, 3 blue, sorcery, draw 3 cards, untap 2 lands, discard a card. So this will usually let you play your Madness spells. If you have 1 more land, you can play almost any of the Madness spells that are out at all, because Madness, for the most part, caps out at 3. But I'm happy with this because you're usually drawing 3 cards, and even at the worst, you're looking at 3 cards and getting rid of your worst. And at the best, you're drawing 3 cards and then playing a spell. Both of those cards are pretty powerful, so I'm going to give this a B-. I would run more than one on my deck, but the first one's really good. Press for answers, 1 in a blue. Tap target creature, doesn't untap during its controller's next untap. Step, investigate. This is more of an aggressive card than a defensive card. It keeps one of your opponent's creatures from attacking for 1 turn. And you can investigate, which I like. What I don't like about that is that there's no like super high payoff. It just stops 1 creature from attacking for a turn. Whereas in an aggressive deck, you can get in a pretty good attack twice. Press for answers is like probably a C-. Rattle Chains, 1 in the blue for a 2/1 flying flash. When enters the battlefield, target spirit gains hexproof. You may cast spirit spells as though they have flash. That's cool for the spirits and all, but I'm mostly just thinking this is a 2/1. for 2 with flying and flash, which is solid. It's like a C+. Reckless Scholar, 2 and a blue. For 2/1, target player draws a card and then discards a card. It's okay to kind of baddish, like a C-, maybe a C in a normal deck. It's like a C+ or B- in a Madness deck, just because there's no cost or mana cost so that you can cast your Madness spells easily. If you have a Madness spell with X in it, like we'll see later and that kind of stuff, you can pay the full amount, and you get a draw card as well. So that's a pretty big boon there. Really, really good at Madness. Rise from the Tides, 5 and a blue. Put a 2/2 black zombie creature token on the battlefield tapped for each instant or sorcery in your graveyard. This is a cool card. It's supposed to be kind of like the spider spawning of this set. I think it's going to be cool. I'm excited to play the deck. Playing a deck that has lots of cards like Press for Answers and the other Investigate spells. Slows down your opponent. You know, you're playing an unusually high amount of instants and sorceries that have small effects and draw more of them. But I really think that Rise from the Tides is going to be one of those cards that you can build around and create a really cool and interesting deck if it comes together. I'm not 100% on where it's going to be at, but I'm going to pick it very highly. It's the linchpin card to win your matches if you make the deck. You're basically building the deck around your Rise from the Tides, which is an interesting spot to be in. Seagraph Scab is 1 in blue for a 1/3 zombie. It's fine. Block's fine. There is a zombie deck, so the tribal amount counts for a small amount. But overall, this card's probably just another, I think it's a C-. 1/3, not flying, loses a lot. It blocks okay. Maybe it's a D+. I don't even know if I really want to run a 1/3. I really don't. I think it's just a D+. Because it can't chip in for damage. Like, you get so much more by just having flying. You get like a letter grade and a half for a 1/3 for 2, just because a 1/3 for 2 doesn't attack and do anything well. It's just a speed bump in most cases. But you'll often bring him in out of your sideboard against super aggressive decks. Silberland Snapper is 5 and a blue for a 6/6 turtle. So it already blocks pretty well. It can't attack unless you've cast a non-creature spell this turn. How many non-creature spells are you casting? How many are you playing? That's really the problem with this card, and the answer is probably not that many. Or if you're in a deck that's casting a lot of non-creature spells, you don't want your payoff cards to just be vanilla 6/6s. Like, if we compare the Silberland Snapper to Rise from the Tides, Rise from the Tide will usually win you the game once you have like 5 or 6 instants and sorceries in your graveyard. That's a lot of power and toughness. Silberland Snapper is telling you to cast those cards afterwards. I do like how you don't have to cast all of your non-creature spells in a row for it, or sorry, prior. It doesn't care what you cast in prior, it cares what you cast afterwards, but you can't even save them up. You can't even craft a game plan after 6 mana. So for me, this is just another D. Silent Observer is 4 and a blue for a 1/5 fly. I think that's too much. I'd be pretty happy with 3 and a blue for a 1/4 flyer, but for 4 mana, I don't know if it's doing quite enough. I think I'm really going to be bringing this out of the board. I think this is another D+, D card for me. I will not usually be running the first one main board unless I'm an extremely defensive deck. Alright, Sleep Paralysis. 3 and a blue, enchant creature. When it enters the battlefield, tap that creature. Doesn't untap during that creature's untap step. So it's removal. It doesn't get rid of abilities that don't involve tapping, but it is removal. So that's pretty strong there. It's probably just a C+ for me. Removal like this in blue is hard to come by, and you're always going to be playing this if you're in blue. That said, I would not pick this over the other removal in other colors that tends to be better. Stitch Mangler is 2 and a blue for a 2/3. It enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, tap target creature. That creature doesn't untap during its opponent's next untap step. So it prevents somebody from attacking. It lets you get through damage. And it attacks fairly well for a 3 mana card. So I'm pretty high on this. I think it's a C+. I really enjoy the kind of effects that lets you tap down your opponent's best creatures. It plays well offense and plays well on defense. Oh, this is one of my favorite cards right here with Stitchwing Scab. I like how it looks like a sad Batman. 3 and a blue for a 3/1 fly. And that's already getting pretty close to where I'm just happy. It's like a C plus for me right there. I'll usually run that card. It's probably like a C for me. But I'll usually run that card. I'll run the first one. Just a 3-power flyer is really good, especially if they can't answer it. But it has 1 in a blue, discard 2 cards, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Once you fit your land cap, you can just turn every 2 lands into another Scob. If you have Madness cards, it's great for activating your Madness cards because you can really activate it. If you have to discard a card, right? If you have a Lightning Axe, you can play your Lightning Axe, and then later in the game, you can just bring your Stitchwing Scab out of your graveyard into play. So there's a lot of flexibility in this card. So for overall, I think this card's a B for me. It's a card I'm extremely excited to have. I'd happily run 2, maybe even 3, especially if I had the cards that went together with it so that I could play it multiple times. Alright. Storm Rider Spirit is 4 and a blue for a 3/3 flying flash. Solid. I like it. I like being able to surprise something, be able to kill a 2-powered creature with not much problem at all, being able to leave up instant sources and attack back if they don't play anything is also quite nice. It's a good B- for me. I really enjoy the first flash creature in my deck. Trail of Evidence is 2 and a blue. Whenever you cast a sorcery instant, spell Investigate. I don't usually like enchantments like this. There's not enough payoff. You're not usually running that many instants or sorceries, and even if you are running non-creature spells, this is taking up one of those slots, and the fact that that card takes up one of the slots just makes it not quite good enough. For me, this is like a D or D-. You're just not usually going to end up in the deck able to run it. Vessel of Paramnesia is 1 and a blue. For enchantment, sack it. Target player mills the top 3 of the cards of their library, and you draw a card. It replaces itself. It really is probably one of the primary ways to activate Delirium well. The fact that you get to mill 3 is a real big bonus, and it also puts in itself as an enchantment. So in theory, you could just activate this in Delirium right off the bat. It's unlikely, but you're going to be very close, even if you don't have it. You're probably going to get a land and a creature and an enchantment, which means you just need a sorcerer instant to make it happen. So I'm actually going to pick that pretty high. I think it's like a C+. I would usually run 2 of them. And the worst case scenario is you just get another card off them, which isn't bad at all. Welcome to the Fold is 2 and a blue. 2 blue. Gain control of target creature if its toughness is 2 or less. And sorcery, Madness for X blue. If you paid its Madness cost, instead gain control of target creature if its toughness is X or less. This card is not good if you don't have Madness, and it is fine if you do have Madness, but you're paying an extra 2 blue to gain it, right? If they have a 4 mana creature that you want to, a 4 toughness creature, you're paying 6 for it. Not particularly easy. But the effect is very powerful, and even when we've seen bad versions of this effect, they've still been pretty powerful. I think it's like a C+. I would be happy to make this part of the reason for me to go into a Madness deck. Alright, black. Alms of the Bane, 3 and a black. Target opponent loses 3 life, you gain 3 life. Madness for black. That's not really a playable card, unless you just need to kill people really quickly. So, it's like a D-. Asylum Visitor, 1 and a black for a 3/1. Vampire Wizard. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Madness for 1 and a black. I like this a lot in decks with discard outlets because you can easily get no cards in hand. This doesn't depend on your opponent, and it's fine if your opponent doesn't have any cards in hand, then yeah, you're drawing up to 2 cards a turn with it, sure. But you can easily get the 1 card pretty well. The fact that it has Madness, I think this all comes together with 3 small abilities. A 2 mana 3/1 is fine but not great. Having Madness is fine but not amazing. And being able to draw a card some amount of the time is fine but not amazing. But all together, that card comes together to be like a B- for me. A card I'd be very happy to have, and it'll work in several decks. Behind the Secrets with the Fish People. 3 and a black. Creatures you control have Skulk. 4 and a white. Target creatures you control get +1/+1 until end turn. So there's a couple of interesting things going on here. You can play the enchantment, and your creatures are getting through pretty well. And you can pump after blocks to make your guys bigger. Now, you probably can't pump more than once, but if you get 3 creatures through, that's 3 more damage. And repeatable for 5 mana is not a bad place to be. Not a great place to be. I could see running this in a lot of different decks. If I had creatures that had effects when they did damage, I'd be more likely to run it. Or if I was in a black-white deck. But I don't think I would run it highly. I think it's somewhere around like a C-. You will sometimes run it, but not usually run it. The evasion is pretty nice, though. Behold the Beyond is 5 black. Sorcery, discard your hand, search your library for 3 cards, put them into your hand, shuffle your library, don't play this card. It's an F. 7 mana cards that do not win you the game shouldn't be played. Biting Rain. This is the meanest Rain. This is one of my favorite ridiculous cards I've seen in a long time. That person's just dying to rain. 2 black, sorcery. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. That effect's fine without being great. Madness for 3 and a black. Now that's interesting. Because you can use this as a combat trick, and that's a really good combat trick. So I think if you have Madness, this card's like a B-, and if you don't have Madness, this card's like a C. So that's a pretty big jump. Call the Bloodline is 1 and a black. Enchantment. 1, discard a card, put a 1/1 black vampire creature with lifelink on the battlefield. Activate this ability only once each turn. So for 1 mana, you get a creature, and you can activate Madness. If you have a Madness deck, this is a great card. If you do not have a Madness deck, this is not a great card. It's essentially build around Madness, however you want to put that at. Yeah, some people are pointing out that behind the scenes plays well with token decks. I totally agree. Skulk is a really interesting evasion mechanic in that it is worse on bigger creatures. It's like opposite trample, which is really cool in that Wizards found a way to kind of reward you for playing smaller creatures. It probably means Unblockable is going to be very, very sparsely used, and instead you'll have Skulk on smaller creatures. But attacking with a bunch of 1/1s or 2/2s makes them really hard to block. You can easily win the game quickly by just dropping this card on your board of a bunch of tiny creatures and keeping just a couple blockers back to block their big creatures. You don't even have to be in black-white to play this card. That's the cool part. There are several decks that will be happy to play behind the scenes for just the black half. The reason that I rated it so lowly comparatively to the other one, to the fact that the black half is just fine, is that most decks don't even want the card. So it is tricky. Creeping Dead is 3 and a black. Enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player discards a card. And if your opponent discarded the same type, they lose 3 life. If you have a Madness enabling deck, or a very grindy deck, this can be good. If you have effects that come out of your graveyard, this can be good. But it is a card that requires you to build around in a significant way, and the payoff is only moderate because it doesn't do anything that late anyway. Like, it's a bad late game card. So I think it's like a C- build around type card. Crow of Dark Tidings, 2 and a black for a 2/1 flying. Zombie Bird enters the battlefield. Mill 2. I like that. Mill 2 is a positive ability, and the 2/1 flying in black for 3 is pretty solid as well. I'll be happy to run the first 1 or 2. It's probably a C+ for me. I really like that mill. It really gets you to Delirium or other effects. Yeah, someone's pointing out that discarding with things like Creeping Dead has some other synergies in it. In Limited, I just don't think that they're going to come up as often as... They're not going to come up often enough that I'm going to be happy usually running it. Sometimes Creeping Dead will be great. Sometimes you'll have a deck with Delirium or Madness or other graveyard effects, and it'll do good work in your deck. It just usually won't, and it's not the most important card in that deck. The upside to Creeping Dead is mostly that it gets rid of your opponent's hand. So, like, you'll be really happy to pull this in the board if you're an aggressive deck against a really controlling deck, right? You play 2-drop, 3-drop Creeping Dead, and then you play out the rest of your hand, and your opponent's scrambling to try to get lands down and trying to cast spells. It's pretty good then, but I think out of the main board, I'm not too high on it. However, Deadweight is an enchantment for black. Enchanted creature gets -2/-2. This is a great removal. It's excellently costed for me. It's just a solid B. I would run as many Deadweights as I could get. It basically means it kills not most creatures. It kills a solid amount of creatures, and the creatures it doesn't kill usually can die in combat. You can attack your 3/3 into their 5/5, and then second main phase, just Deadweight and kill it. Or you can take their 3/5, turn it into a 1/3, and now they can't attack with it, and it's a bad blocker. Deadweight is one of the premier removal spells in this set. Diregraph Colossus is 3 and a black for a 2/2 zombie giant. And then there's the battlefield 1/1 creature counter for each zombie creature in your graveyard. And whenever you cast a zombie spell, put a 2/2 zombie creature onto the battlefield tapped. Both ends of this are very powerful, and I'm happy with either of these. Even if it's just a 3 mana 4/4 or 3/3, or if I just get 1 or 2 zombie spells, that's great. I don't have to get a lot of zombies for this card to just be amazing. I think it's the best of the odd tribal that we've seen so far, and for me it's like a B+. You're probably just going to have a couple of the zombies, and that's good enough. Ever After, 4 black sorcery. Return up to 2 guard creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield. Each of the creatures is also a zombie, and put Ever After on the bottom of its owner's library. A lot of flavorful things going here. Paying 6 mana to get 2 creatures back. Is that good enough? Maybe. It depends if you can self-mill yourself or not. If you have some amount of self-mill, this card goes up a lot in my estimation. If you do not, it's fine without being great. I don't really want to bring back 2 of my cards that cost less than 6 for 6 mana, because sometimes bringing back cards doesn't happen at all because your opponent exiled things. All that said, I think it's pretty strong. I think it's like a B- for me. It's kind of card that's usually going to get some good pressure going in. It is a 2-for-1 in many situations. And when you have mill, it's really going to shine, because you can get back cards that, I don't know, you can get back a 5-drop and a 6-drop. But even if you get back a 4 and a 5-drop, Ever After is very good. It's just, for 6 mana, you need to get back more than 6 mana's worth of creatures to make it great. Firebog Revenant is 2 and a black for a 1/3 Skulk and lifelink. I like this card. It plays decent offense and decent defense. Gives you life as you go along, and if you don't have any good attacks, it's probably blocking something okay. Alright. From Under the Floorboards. 3 black. Put 3 2/2 zombies into the battlefield tapped, and you gain 3 life. That card's already fine. I will already run that card all the time. So that's a good place to be. We're already at a card that I think is like a C+, and for Madness, which is X black, you put X zombies into play, tapped, and gain X life. So it's playable without Madness, and it's amazing with Madness, right? You can play it for less if you have to discard it early. You can play it for more later, which is what you'll normally do. So for me, I think this card is my first A-, and the only reason it's A- instead of a higher grade is because it requires a setup cost. But if you have 7 mana, you're getting 5 2/2s. Now they're tapped, so they don't block well, but you gain the 5 life to buy you that time to probably use those cards. So that's a really powerful card, and it's flexible. Ghoul Caller's Accomplice is 1 and a black for 2/2 Human Rogue. Okay. 4 and a black, exile it, put a 2/2 zombie onto the battlefield, activated sorcery. I like that it builds bodies. The fact that bringing back a zombie could be relevant, but probably not particularly relevant. It's a human, which a little less energy than you'd hope there for some things, but overall I'm pretty happy with it. I think this is like a C+ because it's 2 bodies on one card. Ghoul Steed is 4 black for a 4/4 zombie horse. Discard 2 cards. Or sorry, 3 black, discard 2 cards. Return it from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Doesn't block there, but it comes back. A 4/4 that returns is really powerful. I think it's like a B+. Being able to play a 4/4 over and over is real rough. Maybe it's not quite a D+, B+. Maybe it's a B. It's up there. It's one of the better creatures overall, and it can win the game on its own. I mean, how often does your opponent have a way to deal with a reoccurring 4/4? You can play a 4/4 every other turn for the rest of the game. Your opponent's going to be in a rough spot. Gissa's Bidding is 2 black. Put 2 2/2 zombies onto the battlefield, or Madness it for 2 and a black. I like this card. I would play 2 black for 2/2 zombies pretty well. I'd put that card probably somewhere around a C+, and with the Madness it's probably a B-. Grotesque Mutation. It's a creepy picture. 1 and a black, instant. Target creature gets +3/+1 and gains lifelink. We saw a version of this with Trample. This one kind of extends the game. I think Trample's better than lifelink for what this type of combat trick's usually doing. But you're usually gaining 4 to 6 life, which is a nice way in races. C- is a combat trick. Hound of the Farbogs. 4 black for a 5/3 zombie hound. Delirium. It has Menace. I like this card. 4 and a black for a 5/3 is fine on its own. I'm not usually going to run more than one of those. I'm not going to be excited to run that. 5 mana, 5/3 is like a C minus. But as soon as you get the possibility for Menace, it moves up to like a C plus. So I think it's really in the middle. It's just a C. But I think it's very powerful when it has that Delirium side. Indulgent Aristocrat is black for a 1/1 lifelink vampire. Sacrifice a creature, put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. Or sorry, 2 sacrifice a creature. It's fine without being great. I mean, how many times are you going to have a lot of creatures and vampires? That's the tricky part. It's better then, but then I have a 1/1. As soon as you sacrifice the first creature, it's serviceable without being great. A lot of factors here, a lot of setup cost. If you have enough vampires, it can be good. It can be a good board stall breaker, but I think I'm going to bring it in from the sideboard and not start it in the main board. He does have a lot of Cups of Blood, though, so there's that. Liliana's Indignation, X black, put the X top cards of your library into your graveyard. Target player loses 2 life for each creature. Put in your graveyard this way. Okay, so first and foremost, this is not a way to kill your opponents. Not effectively. You get to do half damage, about every other card you have as a creature in the deck, hopefully, for this one. So if you pay 5 mana, they lose 5 life. It's like a bad blaze. The only time I really see myself wanting to run this card is if for some reason I want my cards in my graveyard. I really need Delirium and I don't have any other way to get it, which is really unlikely in black. Or I really have some way to just mill a ton of cards to set up my card that cares about cards in my graveyard. I don't see it. It's a card that goes under some sort of build-around deck, but I don't see that deck, so I'm going to go ahead and just give this like a D. Maybe it goes in one of the decks that cares about instant sorceries in your graveyard or zombies in your graveyard, but I'm not buying it yet. Macabre Waltz, which is a reprint with a kind of cool new art. 1 in black, sorcery. Return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard, then discard a card. It's really good here. You can get back 2 creatures and madness a card. That's the best case scenario. That's super cool. You can get back 2 creatures that have madness, or a creature that has madness. Discard that creature for its madness cost because of how it's ordered, and you basically got to return 1 creature to your hand and the other to play. That's really good. The worst case scenario is you return 2 creatures to hand and you discard one of those creatures because you don't have any other cards in hand. That's okay, but usually it's going to be get 2 creatures back and discard a land, which is also okay. I really like this. I think it's really good in the set. I think it's somewhere around it's probably a C because you're not usually running more than 1, but the first one's real good. Markov Dread Knight is 3 black for 3/3 flying. Acceptable without being great. 2 in a black, discard a card. Put 2 1/1 counters on it. That's a powerful ability. Makes it into a must kill. If you can untap with this creature and get rid of 1 land, 1 madness spell, 1 whatever, you've made a basically must answer threat and that can kill your opponent very quickly at any point. Right? I mean, you can attack for 5. The next turn, you can attack with 7 for this. If your opponent just taps out and doesn't think you have something, you can just tap 7 and tap 6 and maybe one of those cards is a madness card, bolt something with Fiery Temper and get it through lethal. So it's pretty potent. For me, it's a solid B just because of the lethality of it. Merciless Resolve. 2 in a black, instant, as an additional cost. Sack a creature or land, draw 2 cards. It's fine. It's a good Delirium enabler. So, all of that together puts you in a position where Merciless Resolve is playable. I'd be happy with the first one. Probably wouldn't run the second one. Just drawing 2 cards is much worse than exiling one of your opponent's cards. It's less flexible of a ability overall. So for me, it's like a C-. I'm not upset to run the first one, but I'm not excited. Mind Rack Demon. 4 black for a 4/5 flying trample. When enters the battlefield, you mill yourself for Delirium. If you don't have Delirium, you lose 4 life. You're going to die really quick from this card, but you might be able to kill your opponent faster. This is a good card in heavy Delirium decks because it helps you get to Delirium, and there's a really good chance that he's going to activate the Delirium if you've done any work ahead of time. The downside is if this is not a Delirium deck, you could die very quickly, and it's many, many ways where this card will not outrace it. That said, I think that the cost is well worth the card. I think there's a lot of situations where you'll end up far ahead from that. So for me, I think Mind Rack Demon is somewhere around probably a B+. Like, you can just play it. If you cast any cards before the activated Delirium, you're almost assuredly to have Delirium after that other effect. The chat is telling me that we need Satyr Wayfinder type cards. And, that would be great. But Mind Rack Demon does have that first upfront effect of just milling 4 cards. Morkrut Necropod. 5 and a black for 7/7 menace. Whenever it attacks or blocks, sacrifice another creature or land. Oh, it's trying to give you Delirium way too late in the game. I don't think I want to run a 6-mana 7/7 with menace. I mean, it's nice. Your opponent does have to block. It's usually going to trade for 2 cards. All that sounds really good. Except for, I just don't know if I want to sacrifice my lands like that. I guess in a deck that doesn't have a lot of discard outlets, it's better because I'm usually just going to play my lands and I can sacrifice a land every turn or not attack. But I don't think it's great. I think it's like a C or a C+. I just don't even know how often I want a 6-mana menace card either. Murderous Compulsion. 1 and a black, sorcery, destroy target tapped creature. I like that card. Madness for 1 and a black. Slightly better. It's like a B. Solid removal spell. It's going to do good work. If you can Madness it, obviously you can just destroy their attacking creature. Olivia's Bloodsworn is 1 and a black for a 2/1 flying vampire soldier. It can't block, and you can play red to give target vampire haste. If you're an aggressive deck, this is a great card. For 1 black red, this is a 2/1 flying haste. It can give your other creatures haste. It can put a lot of pressure on, but it can't block, and that's a real downside. It's less of a downside on a 2/1 flyer, so for me, this is a C+. I'll usually always play this card. It'll get in a good bit of damage, and every once in a while you lose the game because you couldn't block, which is fine. Pell Rider of Trostad. 1 and a black for a 3/3 Skulk. When it enters the battlefield, discard a card. Don't know how good 3/3 Skulk is. Don't know how good a 2-mana 3/3 is when you have to discard a card. Because if you're playing on turn 2, when it's big, you're not madnessing. If you're playing it later, how good is a 3/3? Which is not terrible, but it's not great. And how much does Skulk matter? A lot of different weird things going together with this card. This is a very odd card. I'm having a hard time really evaluating it. I'm going to start it out at a C+. It's a card that I'd like to try. I think it is powerful, but I don't think that it's going to... I could see this card being as low as like a C-. It's a pretty big variable card. Pick the Brain. 2 and a black. Sorcery. Target opponent reveals his or her hands. You choose a non-land card and exile it from that. From their hand. And Delirium, if you Delirium, you get to search through the library, graveyard, everywhere else. Get rid of the extra copies. Which doesn't matter that much. This is a sideboard card. And otherwise it's like a D-. I don't know. You're trying to play this the turn before they would play a bomb you can't beat. So like a Planeswalker or a real big creature. But usually you're just not running this main board ever. Rancid Rats is 1 and a black for a 1/1 Skulk Death Touch. I like Death Touch creatures. Even if it costs 2, it's still solid. C+. And having Skulk means that it can attack well. Your opponent probably wants to trade their 1/1s anyway, but if they don't have them, it just gets in. Alright, let's get into some real good cards. Relentless Dead is black for a 2/2 menace zombie. Black is a real cost. Remember that your mana base is not perfect. You're probably running 60-40, maybe 70-30 mana base. When it dies, you may pay black. If you do, return to its owner's hand. So it can block a bunch or attack a bunch. When it dies, you may pay X. If you do, return another target zombie card with the converted mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield. Another powerful ability. The card that's keeping this back from just being an all-star is that it's very black mana intensive. And it's not easy to keep up that much black mana. You aren't in a constructed setting where mana issues are very negligible. Mana issues are a very big deal. This card won't be able to consistently be cast. You won't be able to consistently get it back. Your opponent can put it in situations where it's going to be hard for you to put your opponent in situations where if it dies, you always have the mana open. In that way, it blocks better than attacks in some ways. But all of that said, the culmination of these 3 abilities is so good. I don't think I can give this below like a B. It might be higher with the amount of strong abilities, but because it's so efficient, it could be even as high as a B plus or an A minus. Oh, we have a question from Koto Ongo. I need your advice. I haven't played MTG. I want to learn the game. Since Shadows is coming out pretty soon, I think we'll start with that deck. But which one would you recommend me to buy? Pre-release kit, dual deck builder kit, or fat pack? If you're just getting into Magic, you have to decide what you're playing. If you're playing a situation where when you're first starting Magic, you should decide if you're going to play Standard, if you're going to play Casually, or something else. And if you're going to play Casual Magic, which is what I recommend, I do not think starting in Standard is a good position. It's expensive and it's hard. Then I would probably go with something like a Tool Builder's Kit or maybe a Fat Pack. But a pre-release can be a fun way to play too. All of those are pretty good values. But if you go check something like Reddit or Magic Forum, it'll be pretty good too. Someone's recommending Duels for the computer. If you just want to learn how to play Magic, I think that Duels is the best way to play Magic at first. It's free. It lets you earn stuff. It teaches you how to play the game. The only downside is you don't get physical cards, but because it's free, it's not that big of a deal. Alright, well, I'm going to get back to the pre-release stuff, or talking about the cards for the pre-release, hopefully for those of you going. With Rotten Heart Ghoul. 3 and a black for a 2/4 zombie. When it dies, target player discards a card. Now, there's a couple things going on here. You can target yourself for Madness. You can target yourself for Delirium. That's cool. You're usually going to target your opponent to get rid of their last card in hand or whatever. That's fine, too. It's a pretty good defensive card at the 2/4. I think I'd be happy to have the first 1 or 2. It is worse than the mirror version, which investigates, I think, overall, but it's still probably just like a C. Sanitarium Skeleton is black for a 1/2. You can pay 3 and black, return it from your graveyard to your hand. I don't like this if you're trying to mill it into your graveyard, bring it back to your hand, and play it. That's not impressive. I do like this if you have some reason to discard cards in mass. Something like a Reckless Scholar makes this better, but I'm not going to run more than 1 usually, because I only need the 1 to return to my hand and draw and replay multiple times. So it's more of a combo-ish piece than it is necessarily just a good card on its own. You can also pay 4 each turn to just replay it and blank 1 card. So it's like a C- for me. Alright. Shambleback. Black. Sorcery. Exile target creature card from your graveyard. Put a 2/2 zombie onto the battlefield. You gain 2 life. Do you need to exile a card from your opponent's graveyard? It's not going to keep them off Delirium long, but if they're an aggressive Delirium deck, then that might be good enough. If your opponent has some sort of reanimation effect, you can't get rid of their best reanimated card, but you can get rid of the cards that are the best targets for reanimation early. The last thing is, if your opponent has one of the cards where you can discard the cards to make the creature come back into play, you need to do it when they're tapped out or in a position where they don't have the cards, and it can be pretty good there, but for me it's a sideboard card exclusively. Sinister Concoction, black, enchantment. You can pay black, 1 life, mill a card, discard a card, sack it, destroy target creature. This looks like it's an enabler for Delirium, and it is. But the biggest thing is that Sinister Concoction is always good. It's just unconditional removal that tells you to discard a card. Black, black, discard a card, kill target creature. And it's not even always black, black, right? It's almost as good as Grasp of Darkness, except it's not a surprise. That's the only downside. You can play black, pass the turn, and use this ability whenever you want, and it's also not limited to 4 or less toughness. To me, this card is a B+. I will always run this card. I don't even have to be able to cast double black to run this card. It's a great first pick. Yeah, I think that back on Shamble Black, people are talking about how they would like Shamble Back if it was an instant. I think it's not an instant because that effect would be too strong for limited. I would be surprised if they didn't test it at limited and realized Shamble back at instant leads to too many not feel good positions. So they got made it a sorcery. That said, it's a fine sideboard card. It's just a bad main board card. Alright. So like I was saying on Sinister Concoction, just think about how good a card is. Would you play the card that said, black, discard a card, destroy target creature? And the answer is, yeah, you would. You'd always play that card. That card's great. And Sinister Concoction's great. It's a B+ for me. Stallion of Ashmouth is 3 and a black for a 3/3. Yeah, that's fine. It's like a C, C-. 1 in a black. It gets +1/+1 until end of turn. You can only activate as you have Delirium. So it has bad pumping, but a pretty good base stats. Once you have Delirium, the threat of activation is pretty good. If you even attack, if you have 3 different kinds of cards in your graveyard, and one of them's not an instant, you can attack your 3/3 and other cards, and all you have to do is play an instant, and then you can pump this. So the threat of activation is really scary here, because there's a lot of situations where you can't even activate it, but your opponent can't afford to call that bluff. And I like that quite a bit. So for me, it's like a C. Sinister Concoction is costs you 2 cards and gets rid of 1 of their cards. It's definitely not anything more than that. You are just sacrificing this enchantment and discarding a card from your hand, which can be good, but isn't always, to kill their card. That's exactly what it is. You're never losing any more cards than that. Stromkirk Mentor. 3 and a black for a 4/2 Vampire Soldier. Enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on another target vampire you control. It's pretty good. I mean, that is 1/1 counter is usually going to get placed, and a 4-mana 4/2 is not the worst thing in the world. I think it's just another C for me. It's a card that I'll be happy to run 1 or 2 of, but not a ton of. Throttle. 4 and a black for an instant. Target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn. Baddish removal. I still like it. It's like a C. I'll usually run it. It does pretty good work. It being an instant, you can sometimes push it up to a C+ to a C range. To the Slaughter is 2 and a black for an instant. Target player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Delirium, they sacrifice a creature and a planeswalker. Okay, well, they're not normally going to have a planeswalker, so they're normally just going to sacrifice a creature and their worst creature. This card is bad. If your opponent has a planeswalker in their deck, it can be a fine sideboard card to kill their planeswalker. That's it. Alright, Tooth Collector. Oh, let's go up just a little bit. 2 and a black for a 3/2 human. When enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1. That can be good without being great. At the beginning of each upkeep, if you have Delirium, target creature gets... your opponent's upkeep. Target creature gets -1/-1. So how good is Tooth Collector? That's where we're at. How many cards are they playing that have 1 toughness? That's where it matters at. The 3-mana 3/2 is already pretty good. The turn you play it, you can get a pretty good attack in. It can prevent attacks from happening by giving -1/-1. I mean, overall, this is obviously a worse card than Topplegeist, but it's a better card without Delirium. So for me, I think it's like a C+. I'll usually run it. Triskaidekaphobia is 3 and a black. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose 1. Each player with exactly 13 life loses the game, and then they gain 1 life. Each player with 13 life loses the game, then each player loses 1 life. It's a fun card. It's also probably not a card you should play, because draining 1 or adding 1 each turn is probably not going to be good enough. And it's pretty hard to finagle people's life total just like you need to. Alright. Twins of Marrer Estate. 4 and a black for a 3/5. That's okay without being great. Madness, 3 and a black. Wow, that card's really good. If you can activate the Madness with any regularity for this card, I would definitely say it's awesome. Twins of Marrer Estate's one of those cards that goes from like a C-, maybe a C, yeah, probably like a C- card to like a B. Like, if you can regularly activate this with Madness, this card is insane. That's a 3/5 flash for 3 and a black. Oh, 2 and a black. Sorry, was I saying 3 and a black? 2 and a black for Twins of Marrer Estate. 2 and a black. 3 mana. That's a very powerful card. It's probably going to split the difference and say this is like a C+. Vampire Noble. 2 and a black for a 3/2. That's fine. It's a C or a C minus. It just kind of depends on where the format is falling. Vessel of Malignity, 2 in a black. Sorry, 1 in the black. At 1 in the black, sack it. Target player exiles 2 cards from his or her hand. Activate this as a sorcery. It's fine. It helps get an enchantment in your deck or graveyard for Delirium. It doesn't allow your opponent to activate Delirium as easily because they exile 2 cards. To me, it's more of a sideboard card than anything else, unless you absolutely need Delirium. All right, let's go into red. We're a little bit over halfway. Let's start with an awesome card, Avacyn's Judgment. 1 in a black. It deals 2 damage. Sorcery. It does 2 damage as you choose among any number of creatures or players. So, it's just up front a forked bowl. It's sorcery speed. That's good enough. I'm running that card. That's like a C. I'm happy. Madness for X and a red. It deals X damage as you want. So now it becomes an instant speed fireball. Or sorry, instant speed rolling thunder. That's insanely good. So it goes from like a C to an A. The card somewhere in the middle, it's like a B+. This card does a lot of things. You can play it on turn 2 to just kill their 2-drop. That's fine. You can play this card later on. You can play this card after combat too, like turn 4, even if you don't have it. You can attack your 2/2s into their 3/3s. They block. You judgment. You got rid of the board. That's fine. But when you start madnessing, now it's quite powerful. Guys, you don't have to split the damage. You can just do 2 damage to 1 target. You can do multiple targets is the trick for this card. With Avacyn's Judgment, if you have 5 mana and you have a Reckless Scholar, you can tap your Reckless Scholar at instant speed, and you can do 4 mana damage divided however you want. This card is a huge blowout. So yeah, I'm sticking with that B+. Bloodmad Vampire is 2 in a red for a 4/1 vampire. Whenever it deals combat damage, put a 1/1 counter on it, and for madness for 1 in a red. I don't like this card. It's hard to get through 1 toughness creatures, and it has to grow 3 times before it even has any amount of survivability. Once it has 4 toughness, then we're looking at a creature that's hard to block and get through, and you have a 7/4 that sounds great. The only really saving grace is that your opponent can swing out to attack, and then you can madness this in end of turn, and get that first hit in and get a 5/2, which does block well. And you know, they can trade a card for it, but that's also fine. And at the 2 mana point, you're fine trading anything that did 2 damage anyway. So there are those upsides. There's weak games where you play this on turn 3, your opponent plays a creature, you kill the creature, you have a 5/2, they play a creature. You know, there are ways that this card can pay you off. But for the most part, I don't think the payoff is high enough to want to run this. So for me, it's like a C-. Burn from Within is X and a red sorcery. It deals X damage to target creature player. If a creature is dealt damage this way, it loses indestructible. If it would die, exile instead. It's an inefficient but flexible burn spell that also goes to players. Those cards are traditionally very good. I expect this card to be very good. I'll put it at a solid B and leave it at that. Answers their bombs late. Answers their threats early. Dance with the Devils. 3 in a red, instant, put 2/1/1 devil creatures on the battlefield. They have when this creature dies, deal 1 damage to target creature or player. I don't like this card. I don't think paying 4 for 2/1/1s is good enough, even if they can do a total of 4 damage. Like, this card can kill a 4 toughness attacker. That's cool. But it does it awkwardly, and I don't think the flexibility is worth the fact that it doesn't work unless your opponent's creatures are attacking. Avacyn's Judgment is probably better than Burn from Within. Avacyn's Judgment is better than Burn from Within once you have Madness. It's more efficient at most points on the scale, and it's a stronger card. Burn from Within is only better than Avacyn's Judgment if you don't have any Madness outlets. Alright, so Dance with the Devils, probably like just a C or a C- for me. It might just be a C-. I just really don't like just getting 2/1/1s that don't do anything on offense. Devil's Playground is 4 red to put 4 1/1 devils into play, and when they die, you get a 1/1 damage. You get 1 damage. I like this a lot more. Paying 4 for essentially 4 power and toughness that does 4 damage however I want when they die is a lot more attractive. I think that card's more of a acceptable card to be playing, but even then I don't think it's much higher than maybe a C plus or a B minus. Like, that creature is just not good enough as a whole. Dissension in the Ranks. 3 red, instant. Target blocking creature fights another target blocking creature. That's really good. And really punishing. It's a super blowout card. Now, there has to be 2 blocking creatures. That is not always an easy thing. So that's a pretty high setup cost. Those 2 blocking creatures, one of them has to kill the other one. But the good news is, this is the kind of card that will really punish your opponent. Let's say you attack with your 3/3/3s into their 3/4/4s. Awesome. Let's say you attack your 3/3/3s into 2/2/4s and a 4/4. It's still pretty good there because you're killing 2 of their creatures and they're killing 1 of your creatures and you lost a card. But now your attack next turn with your 2/3/3s is going to get through a lot better. So there's a lot of ways this card can be really good, but there are also situations where this card will just be okay. So for me, I think the high upside, right, the high ceiling but low floor card can't really get much above a B minus, but I'm going to go ahead and give it the B minus. Yeah, people are pointing out that the Devils and cards like these are really good against low toughness, like a lot of X1 cards, and that's true. It's also good if your opponent's really aggressive, right? If they attack with a lot of aggressive cards, you can usually get multiple cards out of your 1/1s because they deal 1. But on average, I'm not going to pull it in the main board. Dual Shot. Red. Instant. Deal 1 damage to up to 2 target creatures. That's a sideboard card. I won't normally run that card main board, I don't think. I don't think it's just good enough. I think it's too linear and does too little. I really enjoy the card that does 1 damage to 2 different cards and they can't block, because at least you can craft a game plan where at the very worst you're stopping 2 blockers. At the very worst, Dual Shot is a completely worthless card in the deck. Like, you have to work hard to get your card out of it, and I don't like to work hard to get value out of my cards. Ember Eye Wolf is 1 in red for a 1/2 haste, and you can pay 1 in red to give it +2/+0. That's fine. I don't like that it's kind of baddish on turn 2, but not terrible. Later in the game, you can pump it up, and the fact that it pumps for the mana you spent into it is pretty nice too. I think it's a solid C. Dual Shot only requires different targets. You can do 1 damage to 2 targets, 1 damage to 1 target, or no damage to no targets, but you can't do 2 damage to 1 target. Falconwrath Gorger is red for a 2/1 vampire. Vampires you control that aren't on the battlefield have madness, equal to the converted mana cost. Feels more like a constructed card. If you really want a super aggressive deck, a 2/1 for 1 isn't terrible, but it's not really any better than a 2 mana 2/2 most of the time, and in many ways is worse. So I'm not too big on it. The madness effect is cool, but it's not necessarily reliable with just one of them or great. If I was in a really aggressive black-red deck, I'd consider it. So for me, it's like another D plus C minus card. Probably D plus C or D. But Fiery Temper. 1 red, instant, deal 3 damage to target creature player. That card already is like a C. It may even be a C+. Just dealing 3 damage when you need to deal 3 damage at instant speed is great. And with Madness of red, it's jumping up there. This card's like a B. I would run any number of these cards, and as soon as I had 2, I would make it a priority to get Madness effects. Lightning Bolt is a card that is not printed for a reason, and this card has the very low setup cost to be a Lightning Bolt. Flame Blade Angel is 4 red for 4 flying. I like that. I'm happy with that. It's a little overpriced. I'd rather pay 5 for that. But let's see what the text says. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you or opponent you control, you can have Flame Blade Angel deal 1 damage to that source's control. Controller. That's okay. It's not great. Your opponent attacks you with a 1/1, they take 1 back. That's okay. They hit you with a 10/10, they take 1 back. That's okay. It's a 4/4 flyer though. I like that. So it's like a B minus. I don't think I can go any lower for a 4/4 flyer for 6 with no downside. Geist Blast, 2 in red, instant. It deals 2 damage to target creature or player. Okay, well, we have already reached the C plus level or C level, C minus level, good enough level. I will play Geist Blast just on that side some amount of the time. 2 in a blue, exile from your graveyard. Copy target instant or sorcery you control. You may choose new targets for that copy. That's a little tricky. How many instants and sorceries am I running? How cheap are they? How expensive are they? How am I setting this up? This card requires some amount of setup to be good because you need a lot of instants and sorceries. Now, there's an instant and sorcery deck. Being able to copy stuff is good. It's hard to copy spells that cost more than 3, but getting double of a 3-drop, you can copy a Fiery Temper. That's really good. It's bad removal up front. That's okay. You know, there's a lot of things going on, but it really is a card that goes in a specific deck, and that is more of a build-around deck. But some amount of time, you'll just run Geist Blast as bad removal. So for me, it's a C minus. How does Geist Blast work with Madness? You can just copy it. You can, if Geist Blast is in your graveyard and you have a Madness spell, once you pay the Madness cost, it goes onto the stack as a cast spell, and you can pay 2 in a blue and exile it and copy that spell. Yeah, so let's say that I have Geist Blast in my graveyard, or I cast it, cast Geist Blast, it goes in my graveyard, and then I discard a card from whatever effect it is. Fiery Temper goes to the exile zone. I can choose to Madness or not. If I choose not to Madness, it goes to my graveyard. If I choose to Madness, it goes onto the stack. At this point, I can activate Geist Blast, 2 in a blue, and get another copy on the stack. So it works just like a normal spell. I really like that Geist Blast is an uncommon, by the way. It's really cool when they do things in limited like this. They could have easily tweaked some numbers, made it more powerful, made it a rare. On the red side, it could have cost like red or 1 red, deal 2 damage to target creature or player, and then had the other effects. But just adding that other cost on made it this really cool uncommon for limited, which I enjoy. Gibbering Fiend, 1 in a red for 2/1 devil. When it enters the battlefield, deal 1 damage to each opponent. And Delirium, it deals 1 damage during their opponent's upkeep. I like this card. It's one of my favorite Delirium cards in that you can attack early, and then as the game goes later and this card becomes worse, you can just drop it on the board with Delirium and slowly pick away at your opponent, and they're on a very quick clock. I think this is a strong card, and to me it's a good B minus in sort of a format where being able to just sit and wait does quite a bit, especially in an aggressive deck. Having a early part of just attacking as a 2-mana 2/1, good. Late game effect of pinging away your opponent and putting them on a fairly quick clock. If they're at 8, this puts them on a 7-turn clock. It does 1 when it comes in and 1 on each upkeep. Gold Knight Castigator is 2 red for a 4/9 flying haste angel. If a source would deal damage to you, it deals double. If a source would deal damage to the Castigator, it deals double. So this is essentially a 4/5 as far as combat is concerned, and it doubles the damage dealt to you. I still think it's good enough. I still think I'm going to pick it highly. That is a downside. You do need to be aware of it. There'll be boards where you can't cast it because they'll be able to kill you with other evasive creatures. Doesn't do well against lifelink, but all of that aside, it just attacks well. It just attacks for 4 the turn you play it, and then 4 again. I mean, how many times can your opponent be attacked for 4 before they're dead? They've got to capitalize on that ability really quickly. And if you have any amount of sacrifice outlets for it, you can prevent them from really taking advantage of that as well. Geist Blast, Harness the Storm is a card for constructed. Let's just go with that. Gold Knight Castigator for me is probably a B or a B minus. I know that seems high, but I'm really just impressed with this card. Harness the Storm is not for us. Howlpack Wolf is 2 in red for a 3/3, and it can't block unless you control a wolf or werewolf. If it's a wolf or a werewolf deck, then this card's like a C+. If you don't have werewolves, then it's probably like a C-. Not being able to block is a pretty big downside, and it doesn't necessarily attack through everything, but 3/3 for 3 is pretty bulky. Hulking Devil is 4 in red for a 5/2 devil. It's like a C. C minus. I like how that it hits hard, and I like that it can kill big creatures on the block. Incorrigible Youths is 4 red, 3 red for a 4/3 haste. I like the card. Just that. Like, I would just play that card. That card would be like a C+ for me. Because I like big haste creatures. I like being able to put on a lot of damage quickly that my opponent doesn't expect. Which is the same reason that Gold Knight Castigator is so high. The fact that it has Madness for red and a black, there's uncommons that make this extremely lethal, that put on a lot of pressure very quickly, means that I feel really comfortable giving this card probably a B-. There are many times where it'll be extremely strong. The only awkward part about this card is that Incorrigible Youth's Madness doesn't give it extra haste, because, if you cast it as an instant, you don't get the benefit of the haste, but that's such a minor detail. It's a solid B-. Alright. Inner Struggle. 3 red, target creature deals damage to itself equal to its power. It's an instant. It's bad red removal. I mean, this can be good against their bombs. I'll probably run the first one, but a lot of creatures don't kill themselves when they do this. And 4 mana for odd damage is not great, but it is in red, and red doesn't normally get great removal for big creatures, and this can kill a Tintin. I'll usually run the first one, but I won't be excited to run any more after that. It's like a C- or C for removal. Insolent Neonate is red for a 1/1 menace. You can discard it, sack it, draw a card. You're running a deck that has Madness and has Delirium. I don't think it's enough for a card for me. It's like a D or D-. I just don't want to run that. Lightning Axe, however, is red for an instant. It deals 5 damage to target creature. You may discard a card or pay 5 when you cast it. So late game, when you don't have any cards, it costs 6 to deal 5 damage, which is totally acceptable. And early game, you get to either get rid of your worst card or Madness a card for it. This is a great card. This is a B for me. Insolent Neonate is discard another card and sacrifice it. So it costs you 2 cards to draw a card. I don't think it's good. But Lightning Axe, back on topic, works well with any of the Madness cards. It works well with any card that you don't essentially need right now. It's probably the best Madness enabler, and it goes very well with the best Madness card, which is Fiery Temper. But you don't even have to be in a Madness deck to run it. That will be one of the downsides to this card. And when I say a downside, I mean you have to pick this card high. I will always take this card early, because if I end up in the Madness deck, it's as many as I have. If I had 4, I'd run 4. If I'm not in the Madness deck, I'm still going to run like 2 of these, no matter what, because the removal's just so good. 5 damage kills almost every creature in the format, and an instant speed for just 1 mana, you can't beat that. So it's a solid B. Mad Prophet is 3 in red for a 2/2 haste. Tap, discard a card, draw a card. This is a great card. I played for it last time it was in Innistrad, and it did great work. And with Madness, it's just going to be even better. And with Delirium, it's just going to be even better. You're usually getting rid of your worst card and getting a better card. If you're Madnessing, you're essentially tapping to cast a card with a discount at instant speed and draw a card, which is great. It can give you Delirium. It's a solid B- for me. I'll be happy to run 1 or 2, and it can just attack for 2 on the turn you play if you really need to. Magmatic Chasm, 1 in red. Sorcery, creatures with outflying can't block this turn. If you're an aggressive deck, you might run 1 in the main board, usually a sideboard card. Malevolent Whispers is 3 in red. Sorcery, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap it. It gains +2/+0 and haste. That card's fine without being great. You'll usually run 1 in your aggressive decks if you have the sort of you'll run 1 if you have an aggressive deck. My mind blanked real quick. It has Madness for 3 in red. Now the Madness is a little bit interesting because you're like, well, does that particularly matter? And being able to activate the Madness on your opponent's turn means that when they attack with their creature, you can use your Mad Prophet untap, or steal one of their creatures at instant speed and block with it. So it plays like a higher up cost turn against, but it does more damage, which I think is a really big boon. I actually really like this card. One of my problems with turn against was that it cost 4 mana, so you do need some other ways to keep your mana or do something with your mana, whether that's burn spells, other madness spells, etc. But it can do pretty good work. I think it's like a solid C+. That might be a little high, but I'm going to go with the C+ there. I could see it being a little lower if the combat trick doesn't work as well. All right. This is a card I love right here. Pyrehound. 3 and a red for a 2/3 trample elemental hound. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, you get a +1/+1 counter on this. This card's going to do work. This is an sort of build-around-esque card. You do need to cast 1 instant or sorcery for this to be on rate. Once it's a 3/4 for 4, it's fine. That's just a 2/3. It's not good enough. But all of your combat tricks become split combat tricks. If you have a Giant Growth, you attack with a 2/2 in this, your Giant Growth makes your 2/2 a 5/5, and this into a 3/4. Every time you cast a removal spell, that's getting bigger. If it's in, so you don't even need a dedicated deck for this to take advantage of the 3 to 5 instants and sorceries you're playing. But if you're playing a deck that runs, let's say, 6 to 8, you're going to on average cast 2 or 3. In which case, this card's pretty good. But that first instant, that threat of activation is very scary. I wouldn't block my 3/3 into Pyrehound if you had mana open. It's too much of a blowout. And if you attack 2 creatures in, it's easily setting up multiple 2-for-1s over and over. So for me, this is a really solid B-. It's the kind of card that I'm excited to have. A lot of that B- comes from the fact that there's some setup cost. It could be a little bit lower than that. I could be overestimating the power of the instant sorceries, but I really enjoy it. Ravenous Bloodseeker is 1 and a red for a 1/3 Vampire Berserker. Discard a card, it gets +2/-2 until end of turn. If you can increase the toughness, you can activate this ability more than once. If you need a Madness outlet, this is a great Madness outlet. If you need a Vampire, it's a fine Vampire in that it blocks fairly well and it trades fairly well. All those little advantages together make this card probably like a C+, but you do need reasons to play it. If your deck doesn't care about Vampires, it doesn't care about Madness outlets, it doesn't care about those, this card is okay without being great. But I think all those small advantages lead to a card that you're happy with. Reduced to Ashes is 4 and red for sorcery. It deals 5 damage to target creature. If that creature would die, exile it instead. Solid. Bad removal. I enjoy having some amount of bad removal in my deck. I will usually run 1 bad removal spell if I have even good removal, right? If I had 3 pieces of good removal, I'd still run my first bad removal. If I have no removal, I'll run 2 or 3 pieces of bad removal. So it's a C, maybe a C-. You're going to end up running it pretty frequently because you just need some kind of removal. Rush of Adrenaline is red, instant, target creature gets +2/+1 and trample. You can tell because that lady is jumping at your face, which is kind of nifty. But I like this trick. I like being able to give trample for 1 mana. I like being able to give toughness and power for 1 mana. I think this is one of the best 1 mana tricks that we've seen in a while. I like how red's getting these stronger tricks. It puts red in a better position because the creatures don't tend to be as good. I think it's a C, which is pretty high praise for a trick, especially one that doesn't just give +2/+2 for 1 mana. So Old Man is saying removal is removal, and that is true in what I said, that I will often end up running 3 pieces of bad removal. But removal isn't just removal when you have good removal, because you wouldn't run an unlimited amount of Reduced to Ashes. If I gave you 10 of them and said, would you like to run all 10 in your deck? The correct answer would be no. I can't run 10 5-drops. They're just not good enough. And that's where you're at. But if I gave you 10 Doomblades and said, you want to run 10 Doomblades, you'd be like, sign me up. I'm going to Doomblade everything all day long. And that's the difference between bad and good removal, is bad removal you have to run, and it doesn't feel awful, but it doesn't feel great. And good removal leads to 2-for-1s, leads to blowouts, and leads to board positions where your opponent just can't catch up. Sanguinary Mage is 1 red for a 1/3 prowess. It's fine. It's a vampire. I like that it's a vampire. It's durable. I like that it's durable. The prowess is nice, but it's not great. You can attack into 2/2s pretty safely. If I had a 2/2 and my opponent attacked with the Sanguinary Mage, I would just let the damage through. It's not worth them doing whatever they were going to do. And especially with all the investigate cards around, your opponent can essentially waste or burn a spell, but kill your spell and get that investigate later, and that's pretty powerful. Scourge Wolf, red for 2/2 first strike. Red is a real cost. Let's just get that out of the way. Just like black was a real cost on our zombie buddy, red is going to pull this card down. Delirium, it has double strike. It's not going to be easy to get Delirium early enough to be great. So where is it fitting? Like, Scourge Wolf looks really good, but I think it's more of a constructed card than it is a limited card. If I'm primarily red, will I run it? Yeah. Will I usually run it? Yeah. Am I thinking this is a really, really exciting card? No, because it's hard to get early Delirium and mono red. It's hard to have red in a deck that's not primarily red, so it just doesn't fit together well. The puzzle pieces are disconjoined. This card's a C+. I like it. But if it was 1 in a red, it would probably be like a B. If it was in black, if it was, black, or it was blue or something, a card where I could get Delirium easily, it would shoot up again. Yeah, in Constructed, this card's very good, though. Someone's pointing out that in Constructed it's pretty solid. Yeah, I like it there. Alright. Senseless Rage. 1 in a red, enchanted creature gets +2/+2. Madness, 1 in a 2. I don't usually like auras, but 2 mana for +2/+2 is fine. That's the acceptable range of where auras need to be. But more importantly, it having Madness means that I can use this as a combat trick. Like, if you set your deck up right, you can attack, your opponent does something, you use this as a combat trick. Now I'm excited. Now it's a good card. Without Madness, C-, D+ range, probably C-. It's fine. It goes good in an aggressive deck. But as soon as you have access to Madness, this card shoots up to, like, maybe a C+. It's real strong when you can just give your creature essentially 2 1/1 counters for 2 mana. Sin Prodder, 2 in red for a 3/2 menace. 2 in red for a 3/2 menace is a good card. Like, that card's already at a solid C, at least. At the beginning of it, keep reveal a top card of your library. Your opponent may put that into the graveyard. If they do, they take damage equal to its converted mana cost from Sin Prodder. So what ends up happening here is you reveal the top card of your library, and it's a land. You don't have a land in your graveyard. Your opponent gets to make the decision. Do I get my opponent 1 card closer to Delirium, or do I put a land in their hand? Now, I personally think that the answer is you just put the card into the graveyard, because you're not going to give your opponent an unlimited stream of lands, because you have to do it for every land forever. Let's say you reveal a 4-drop. Your opponent has to decide, do I take 4 damage, or do I give my creature this 3/3 creature? Well, that's another tough decision. And it's going to happen every turn. And that's in addition to your draw. This doesn't replace your draw or anything like that. This is just extra free damage and access to Delirium. And I think a A- for me. The efficiency on this card is very good. Your opponent has to kill it. And every turn they don't kill it, they're pushing you better and better into Delirium and putting more and more damage on themselves. You never have to attack with Sin Prodder to win the game. It will win the game on its own. In, I think, about 10 turns is how the math's usually going to work out. That's a really good card, especially if you put on any pressure already. And it's damage, so you can redirect it to Planeswalker, somebody's pointing out. Spiteful Motives. 3 in a red, enchantment, flash, enchanted creature is +3/+0 on first strike. It has flash, so I guess our question is this playable because it has flash? And I think, yes, you can play the first one. I think it's a C-. I'm not excited to pay 4 mana for that combat trick, but it stays around. It is a powerful effect. If your opponent taps out for a creature and doesn't attack because they think you're going to play something, you can just put it onto one of your creatures that's a good target and then attack next turn with your 6 power first strike creature, 5 power first strike creature. It's very powerful. It's one of the high risk, high reward auras that I'm willing to play, so it's a solid C for me. Stensia Masquerade. 3 in a red. Attacking creatures you control have first strike. Whenever a vampire you control deals combat damage, put a 1/1 counter on it. Madness, 3 in a red. Alright. You need to have Madness to make this card really good. And if you have some vampires, it can be solid. But attacking creature you have first strike is not good enough on its own. What is decent is if you can attack with some amount of vampires and get 1/1 counters on them and make them essentially unblockable because of the first strike. Overall, I think it's still like a C- build around card. But yeah, I mean, the fact that you don't have first strike on defense means a lot. First strike is a much better defense than offensive ability, because 2/2s with first strike hold back a 4/4. A 2/2 with first strike attacking doesn't do much other against other creatures with low toughness or the same. Some people are pointing out that it's like a combat trick, and it is a... Would you play creatures you control have first strike for 2 and a red? Like, that's the combat trick. And I don't think that combat trick's usually good enough. That's just not a combat trick I would usually run. Your opponent doesn't normally match up, you know, I'll put my 4/2 on your 2/1, my 3/3 on your 3/3. Like, they're not making all the trades that turn out to be perfect. I mean, yeah, there are. When you activate Madness, this card does get better, but I don't think it's good enough that you usually want to run it. Right? There has to be a lot of things going on. If you have the vampires and you have the Madness outlets, then it's playable. But that's why it's a build around and not just a solid card to go in every red deck. Structural Distortion is 4 and red, sorcery. Exile target artifact or land. It deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller. I like that it exiles it so that you don't give your opponent Delirium as easily. You'll run it if you need to get rid of an artifact or land out of the sideboard. It's not a main board card. Tormenting Voice, 1 and a red. Sorcery, as an additional cost to casting it. Discard a card, draw 2 cards. It's awesome! Just like the other discard cards that before were like C- that got bumped to C, this is in the same range. It's going to give you way more advantage because of Delirium and because of Madness. You should be running 1 to 2 of these in your deck if you can get them in your color. Aldrich's Kindred is 2 and red for a 3/2 trample. Yeah, that card's okay without being great. Looks like a C-. 3 and a green, target attacking wolf Aerowolf gains indestructible until end of turn. Well, now it's interesting, because you can just attack, and with a threat of activation, your opponent can either call your bluff and trade a card, which you're fine with, or you can just pay 4 to get a free card, which is also really good. It is essentially a 2-color card, but 3 and a red for a 3/2 trample is already just good enough that you'll just play it. Like, you don't have to have the green ability for that card to be playable some amount of time. So I think for me this is just like a C+, which seems a little weird, but you can attack with multiple wolves and werewolves and make the most important one indestructible and let the rest have trades. Or if your opponent can't double block a creature, your opponent has to single block multiple creatures to try to get to a position where it's good. Uncaged Fury is 2 and red. Target creature gets +1/+1 and double strike until end of turn. +2/+2, +3/+. I don't really like that. That's a pretty expensive combat trick. It's good for just if you're in combat damage, but it doesn't like protect your creature from a burn spell, and I like that of my combat tricks. I like the +1/+2 effect that does well in combat and does well in more of a... I like the higher toughness because it does well against burn or creatures, whereas just things like double strike are better for ending the game or killing creatures. I could see running one of these. I'd rather not. It's a D+ for me. Our last enchantment, I think, is Vessel of Volatility, which is 1 in red. And you can pay 1 red to gain 4 red mana. This is a constructed card. You probably shouldn't be playing it. You shouldn't be using a card to ramp out a card. Alright. Voldarian Duelist is 3 and a red for a 3/2 haste. Winters the battlefield. Target creature can't block this turn. I mean, it's nice. It's a great aggressive card. It gets through damage. There's not much else to say about it. I think it's a C+. I think you'd run the first few. If I had more than one of these, I would heavily consider being in an aggressive deck. Oh, we have somebody disagreeing with Vessel. So, here's my problem with Vessel. You're paying multiple turns of invested mana to gain a short-term mana investment. Dark Ritual is not a good limited card. I don't think it really ever has been. I don't think you want to pay a card to gain a temporary mana advantage. That's where I'm at on it. I don't think that's ever been playable in limited. In older formats, when you get the chance to draft them, cards like this pop up, and they tend to be very bad on average. I can't think of a time where a card like this, just mana sort of ritual, has been good. Running cards that are suboptimal to make your other cards better usually doesn't work unless there's a lot of synergy. Like, maybe I would run the Vessel if I was in mono red deck that needed Delirium. I don't know how I'm in that deck, but I don't think I am. Wolf of Devil's Breach will be our last red card. 3 red for a 5/5 Mythic Elemental Wolf. But that's okay without being great. That's probably a C, maybe a C plus. That's pretty efficient. When it attacks, you may pay 1 in red, discard a card. If you do, it deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to the discarded mana cost card. So you can activate Madness with it. It's a Madness enabler, it's a Delirium enabler, and it gets creatures out of the way. Just attacking with the Wolf, if your opponent has, a 4/4, you can use the Duelist, discard your Duelist, and deal 4 to it. And now your opponent can't block. They had a double block before, now they don't. Right? You can kill your opponent's planeswalkers if that ever comes up. I'm pretty happy with Wolf of Devil's Breach. I think for me, with how hard it is to get through it and how efficient it is at removing threats, it's probably either a B plus or an A minus. Alright, let's go over to Creed. Yeah. Whew. Aim high. 1 in a red. Sorry, 1 in a green, not red. Yeah, someone's pointing out that most of the cards seem to be Madness and Delirium enablers. That's red and black. Red and black are the primary Madness and Delirium enabling colors, because those are cards that mostly have to do with self-discard. It's black, red, and blue as the sort of Delirium Madness focused cards. Aim high is 1 in a green. Untap target creature. It gets +2/+2 and gains reach until end of turn. It's an instant. It's fine. That's 1 more mana than I want to pay, right? The reach and untapping is okay, but I'm not excited. So for me, it's like a C-. It's just not a great combat trick. Investigate falls in green, white, and blue. Briar Bridge Patrol is 3 and a green for a 3/3. Okay. Whenever it deals damage to 1 or more creatures, investigate. That's good. That means when it blocks or gets blocked, you investigate, which means even if it dies, it is replacing itself if it dies in combat. At the beginning of the end step, if you sacrifice 3 or more clues this turn, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. That effect is not an effect you will use often. It's almost negligible. But the fact that there's a position where your opponent has to respect that, if you somehow get out multiple clues, you can just pay 6 mana and sacrifice them all to draw 3 and put a creature into play, and you're more likely to draw a creature each time you sacrifice a clue, is nice. But just based on the being a 3/3 and getting to investigate every time it deals damage, I think it's like a B-. I would be really happy to have the first one in my deck. Byway Courier is 2 and a green for a 3/2. When it dies, investigate. Oh, look, it's another card I'm really happy to have in my deck. I think that's also a very solid card. It's usually going to trade and get you a token or a investigation clue, which for me puts it at a C+. Green's on a pretty good tear with those 2 solid creatures. Clip Wings, 1 in a green. Instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature flying. The fact that there are tokens around make that a lot worse. I'm not high on it. It's obviously a sideboard card, but I don't even think it's a great sideboard card. Yes, when everything's... Someone asked if, for these cards that care about sacrificing clues, does it matter how I sacrifice them? The answer is no. If you sacrifice them to a Tog, if you sacrifice them to your opponent's effects. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you use the sacrifice ability on 3 clues. It doesn't matter if you use the ability of 2 and draw a card. Confront the unknown. Green. Instant. Investigate. Then target creature gets +1/+1 for each clue you control. I don't think this is a good card. I don't think it's a card I want to play at all. I want my combat tricks to do more than give me +1/+1. And that's what this does. Sometimes it's +2/+2, but it's like I play combat tricks for effects now and not for card advantage later. I could see places where we would see play, but I really just want more oomph out of my combat tricks, and I don't think this on average is going to give me enough. On average, it's going to give me +1/+1. That's not great. So I'm going to give this a D+. Crawling Sensation is 2 and a green. Enchantment at the beginning of upkeep. You may mill yourself 2. Whenever one or more lands are put to graveyard from anywhere for the first time, to your graveyard, sorry, you get a 1/1 green insect token. That is not good enough. If you have a self-mill deck, then maybe, but I don't think a 1/1 insect on each turn is even good enough necessarily. It's too hard. There's too many things for Crawling Sensation to be good. The setup cost is very high, and the payoff is only medium. Okay, Cryptolith, right. 1 and a green. Creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. It's fine. I don't think it's worth a card. I wouldn't run it. I think it's like a D. It's just not a card I want to run ever. Cult of the Waxing Moon is 4 and a green for a 5/4. I'm happy with that. That's already like a C or a C+. I'll usually run the first one. It's like a C. I'll run the first one. Whenever a permanent you control transforms into a non-human creature, put a 2/2 wolf creature onto the battlefield. So make sure werewolves and a couple other cards give you 2/2s. That's a big upside. So this went from a C to probably a B minus. You don't need that many transformations for this to be awesome. In fact, the number is 1. As soon as you get 1 transformation, this card's awesome. Anything more than that, you're looking at a card that's going to do a lot of work. Deathcap Cultivator is 1 and a green for a 2/1 that adds black or green to your mana pool. That's okay. Delirium, it has Death Touch. That's pretty solid. It plays well early in that it accelerates, attacks, and blocks well, and then late it gives you Delirium, or it gives you Death Touch, and it trades well as well. So I'm actually pretty happy with this card. A little odd that it's a rare, but it's pretty solid. I think it's a B just because of the flexibility. Like, it does everything on curve that I want it to do. It ramps me early, it trades early, it attacks well early, it trades well late. Equestrian Skill is 3 and a green. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3, and if it's human, has trample. It's an aura I don't want to play. D+. There's the slight upside that auras going to your graveyard give you Delirium. That's really all it's got going for it. Fork in the Road is 1 and a green for sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put 1 into your hand, let it in the graveyard. It helps with Delirium. This is a Delirium enabler in green. I don't know how much I like this or not. It fixes your mana, but I don't know how often I'm running more than 2 colors of mana. It gives me 2 cards for Delirium, so if Delirium's important, this card is good. Like, that's where it's at. So it's like a D+ for me, usually. I don't think Delirium will be that urgent that I need to run cards just to get it. Gloom Widow is 3 and a green for a 3/3 reach. It can only block creatures with flying. This is a great card. Solid B- here. Card that I'm happy to run often. I'll run as many as I can get. It's not the best blocker in the world, but it attacks well, and there's enough blockers that matter that I'm happy with it. Looking at this card makes me kind of slightly rethink what I was saying about the wolf that was 2 and a red for a 3/3. I think they're equally good. So I guess I have to make the decision, are both of these cards in the C range or the B range? And I think they're both just C+. So yeah, I'm changing the wolf, and Gloom Widow and the wolf are both just C+ for their ability to attack, and fine on their less than optimal ability to block. Graph Mole, through 2 and a green for a 2/4 Mole Beast. The Mole Beast is finally arrived. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, you gain 3 life. That seems like a kind of side ability, but it's actually a really important ability because it gives you more time to activate more clues. So if you're in the clue deck, I think this is a pretty big pickup. If you're not in the clue deck, it's just like a C because a 2/4 for 3 is fine. But in the clue deck, it's an awesome card. Groundskeeper is green for a 1/1. You can pay 1 and a green, return target basic land from your graveyard to your hand. If you have something that wants you to repeatedly discard, it's better. An example would be like the zombie creatures that come back from your graveyard when you discard cards. You can use Groundskeeper with them to repeatedly get your land cards back at the end of turn when you didn't play instants or sorceries, instants or sacrifice clues. You can just get land cards back and then replay them. So it has some synergy. It's more of a build-around card. It goes in that specific kind of deck. Otherwise, it's just not playable. Howlpack Resurgence is 2 and a green. Enchantment Flash. Each creature you control that's a wolf or a werewolf has +1/+1 and trample. I mean, how many werewolves are you running? Probably not enough for this to be good. If you are running enough, it's a great card. But you don't have to pick it highly. It goes in a specific archetype. Otherwise, it's just unplayable. So it's like a F in most decks and like a C+ or B in other decks. Like +1/+1 is just really, really strong, but how many wolves do you really have? Exonerable Blob. 2 in red for a 3/3. Sorry, 2 in a black. 2 in a green! 2 in a green! 2 in a green for a 3/3. 2 in a green for a 3/3 is good. Like, there we go. That card, C+. Delirium, whenever it attacks, you get a 3/3 creature attacking with it as well. So it just went from a C+ to like a B+. Why is it like a B? Like, here's the tricky part. How often are you getting Delirium early? And then when you do get Delirium early, it's great. And you'll probably just win the game. But if you get Delirium late and you attack with your 3/3, and you get your other 3/3, they're going to block your blob, kill your blob, and then you've got a spare one. Which is fine without being great. So this does need a little bit of backup or early Delirium. It's probably just like a C+, B- range. Like, the upside is definitely there, but it's not as strong as it looks at first. Intrepid Provisioner is 3 and a green for a 3/3 human. Scout, trample. When it enters the battlefield, another target human gets +2/+2. I like that card. The fact that it has trample means it plays well with a lot of combat tricks, which is a slight bonus. And the fact that when you play it, you can probably attack with another human is a pretty big bonus. Usually I'd have this card at like a C- C range, and I think I have it somewhere around the C to slight C+ range. Like, it does go up a whole notch just having those two abilities. Kessig Dire Swine is 4 green for 6/6. Delirium, it has trample. I like that. I'll run the first 6 mana 6/6 at the top of my curve. I would prefer a 5 mana 5/5, but there's nothing particularly wrong with it, nothing particularly great about it. Lone Dryad is green for a 1/2. Tap it, tap an untapped creature you control, add a mana of any color to your mana pool. It's not good. It's an F, or a D-, or whatever you want to give to a really bad creature. Might Beyond Reason. 3 and a green, instant, put 2/1 counters on target creature. I like this. This is the kind of enchantment type effect that I like to have. I can use it as a combat trick. It helps me win the game. It helps me keep those counters on permanently, and it makes me win combat. Delirium, put 3 counters on instead. So you don't need Delirium. It's a small bonus for Delirium, and it's a good card up front. For me, I think this is a C. I'll be happy to run the first one often. Moldgraph Scavenger is 1 and a green for an 0/4. Delirium, it gets +3/+0. So it's like a really, really bad Tarmogoyf that you don't want to play. When you will play this card, honestly, is when you're in like the blue-green Delirium deck or in a green deck that wants to slow the game down early and doesn't mind it 0/4 early and a decent attacker later. That's where it's going to go. So really it's like a D+, but some decks will want it somewhere around a C, which is really nice. When you want these, you'll be able to get them. Moonlight Hunt. 1 and a green. Instant. Choose target creature you don't control. Each creature you control that's a wolf or werewolf deals damage equal to its power to that creature. Okay, if you're running the werewolf deck, this is like an A-. B+. It's just awesome. All your werewolves just murder one creature. And if you're not running a werewolf deck, it's unplayable. Yay, archetype cards. Obsessive Skinner is 1 in the green for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. So at the very worst, it's a 2/2 for 2. I like that. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if you have Delirium, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. So it grows. It grows anything it wants. I like this quite a bit. I think it's a solid C+. Being able to grow any creature you want and itself is pretty threatening late game. A must deal with 2-drop is always a plus. And early game, it's just a 2/2 for 2, which is fine. Pack Guardian is 2 green for a 4/3 flash. I'm sold! When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a land card. If you do, put a 2/2 wolf onto the battlefield. So that's really strong. It enables Delirium well. It is a giant creature with flash that's essentially 6/5 worth of stats for 4 mana. I think it's a B+. It's super efficient. There's not a lot of bad things to say about this specific card. The only thing to be aware of is that it's not an A because of how many cards answer it, and the fact that being over the 2 bodies that flash has a lot of advantages, but is not going to swing through a lot of board states. But that said, you're going to lose to a lot of Pack Guardians, and you're going to win with a lot of Pack Guardians. That's why it's got a B+ on it. Quilled Wolf is 1 in the green for a 2/2. You can pay 5 in a green, even +4/+4. If you have 12 mana, you can do that twice. More importantly, I love 2-drops with activated abilities that give it more power and toughness. It means that early game, this card's fine to play, and it means late game, the threat of activation will mean it's not normally blocked. You can attack this 2/2 into a 5/5, they take the 2, because they don't want to lose their creature for 6 mana, and then you can play your card afterwards. So, very strong. For me, this is a C+. I'll run as many Quilled Wolves as I can get. Rabid Bite. It's some guy biting a werewolf. 1 in a green, sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage to its power to target creature you don't control. It's half of a fight card. The good half. So, I like this. The fact that it doesn't give more power just means that it's like a little tricky to get a ton of value out of it. Like the best case scenario is it's a 1-for-1, and the worst case scenario is you just lose a creature and a Rabid Bite. It's like a C. It's like C removal. It's removal with the setup cost. Root Out. 2 in a green. Sorcery. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Investigate. Hey. That's nice. It's a card that goes in your sideboard that gets you another card. Good stuff. Sideboard. Seasons Past. 4 green, sorcery, mythic. Return any number of cards with converted mana costs different from each other from your graveyard to your hand, and then put Seasons Past on the bottom of your library. So if you have a 5, 4, a 3, and a 2, you get 4 cards back. That's cool. You get a lot of cards back for this, but, getting back a 3, a 4, and a 5 is a great card. But if you don't have a pretty consistent curve of cards, it's not that great. I like it better in a mill deck. I think usually you're not playing it, right? It's can't be that good because you have to recast all the cards too. It's like a really weird draw spell. Do I want to run a really weird draw spell for 6? Maybe? I don't know where this is at. I'm gonna put this at a C+. It's a powerful effect, but you won't always run it. Second Harvest. 2 green. Instant for each token you control. Put a token that's a copy of that token on the battlefield. You get a copy of all your tokens. That's not a very good card in Limited. Let's not run it. Let's call it unplayable, because that's what it is. Even if you have 2/1/1 Flying Spirits, it's not very good. At 3/1/1 Flying Spirits, you're approaching a card that might be okay sometimes. So, don't run that. Silver Fur Partisan. 2 and a green for a 2/2 Wolf Warrior Trample. Meh. That's okay without being great. Whenever a wolf or werewolf you control becomes the target of an instant or sorcery, put a 2/2 green werewolf onto the battlefield. Oh, well, now it's really good. All you have to do is target one of your spells one time, or if your opponent targets one of your spells, including this one time, and you're ahead. So I think this is actually pretty solid. have it at a B minus, a B plus. I like that the trample plays well with other stuff. All right. Soul Swallower. 2 green for a 3/3 trample. Acceptable without being great. Delirium, put 3 1/1 counters on it. Hey, now it's really good. So this is a card that's really pushing you to have Delirium. If you have Delirium, this card's like a B, maybe a B plus, maybe an A minus. It's like a B plus if you have Delirium pretty consistently, because your opponent has a 1-turn window to kill it with small removal, followed by a no-turn window to them dying quickly. That all said, if you do not have Delirium, it's still just like a C minus because of the double green. So I would usually split the difference here and say this card's like a B minus that's quite solid overall. Stoic Builder is 2 and a green for a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, you return a land card from your graveyard to your hand. I'm not in love with this. If you're playing in a mill deck where you're going to get multiple lands in your hand, it's nice to have the option to pull one back. The fact that it's a May means you can keep Delirium on, but I don't really like to run 2/3s for 3, so it's a C minus. Thornhide Wolves, 4 and a green for a 4/5. The fact that it's a wolf is a nice bonus. Obviously, tribal stuff matters here, but it's not amazing either. For me, it's just a C. I'll almost always run the first one, and I'll be down on the second and third. Tireless Tracker is 2 and a green for a Human Scout. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, investigate, sacrifice. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, it gets +1, or put a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, so this is kind of one of the payoff cards for the sort of clue deck. You play it early, and then you start activating your kind of clue cards, getting more clues as you go along. Each land drop being a clue will cause you to get more clues as you keep going. And this growing allows it to kind of keep down the defense or put on pressure for your opponent. I feel like Tireless Tracker is an excellent card. You don't have to be in the clue deck for it to be good. Just being a 3/2 by itself that powers itself up, makes itself bigger, and draws you cards is great. I've got Tireless Tracker at a solid B. I'll be excited to play it every time. It is a little bit slow, but it gives you card advantage and counters over time. Traverse the Uvenwald is green, sorcery, search your library for a basic land, put it into your hands, shuffle your library. Okay, well, at this point, I am not playing this card unless I really need Delirium. Delirium, search your library for a creature or any land. So you can get a non-basic land or any creature and put it into your hand. That's a lot more powerful, but the question is, how often do you have Delirium and how often do you need color fixing? If your deck has Delirium frequently and is running 3 colors, Traverse the Uvenwald is a playable card. But the rest of the time, it's not an exciting card. And sure, you can say, well, I can just run it if I'm a mostly green deck for mostly free, but it does cost you a slot in your deck. So I'm going to go with the C- on this card. Unless I had some creature that I really needed to get, or I had a lot of access to Delirium easily, I just would be out on this card. It's just not going to do enough. Uvenwald Hydra is 4 green for a Mythic Hydra. It has reach. Power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control, so it'll usually be a 6/6 or a 7/7 when you play it. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for land and put it in the battlefield tapped. Okay, so you get a 6 mana 7/7 or 8/8. It blocks well. It has reach. I like that it has reach because it lets it sort of stabilize the board better. It is a pretty solid threat. It can hold back the board until you get to the point where it's big enough to attack well. With all of that said, I still don't think it's much better than just a B- because of the cost to power ratio not being great. I like that it grows as the game goes, though. Uvenwald Mysteries, 2 and a green enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, investigate. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a 1/1 human creature soldier token onto the battlefield. That's okay. You get a card back for each creature that dies, and you can get effects for your investigating. Like, it obviously goes into the investigation deck and kind of builds off that. You do have to choose how many of these cards that are non-creatures you're going to put in your deck. I do still think it's solid enough that I would usually play it. So I think that Uvenwald Mysteries is like a build around, but it's like a build around C+. It's a card I'm happy to build around. Vessel of Nescancy. I don't know. Green to play, and one of the green, sacrifice it. Reveal the top 4 cards. You may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. So you're always going to hit into your hand and put the rest in your graveyard. Great. So it's very similar to the blue one. You can't mill your opponent, but you do get a little bit more card selection. I like it. I'll usually run it whether or not I'm running Delirium. Just because it gives me something to do with my early turns. So, it's like a C. I'd run 2 pretty frequently. Veteran Cathar is 1 in a green for a 2/2. Okay, well, that's pretty cool. 3 and a white, target human gains double strike. That's pretty cool too. Text is a 4/2 essentially, right? The double strike is pretty potent. And give your other humans that as well. So that's a really good tribal-esque card. I'd be happy to have it solid C+. Oh, look, it's my least favorite card in this whole set. Watcher in the Web. 4 and a green for a 2/5 spider with reach. Hey, that's not great. Watcher in the Web can block an additional 7 creatures each combat. Hey, that's not cool. So, Watcher in the Web is a good card. It can usually block 2 creatures well. The problem I have with this is it also blocks 4 spirits well. It blocks a lot of things. If you put any sort of toughness increasing things on this whatsoever, if you give this +2/+2, it now blocks 3 creatures exceedingly well. It is not a fun card to play against. It blocks... There's going to be a lot of board stalls where your opponent has a Watch in the Web. It's just not fun. I wish this card was an uncommon and slightly stronger, because the idea of my opponent having 2 Watcher in the Webs and overlaying those blocks and having double blocks across multiple creatures is also not fun. Right? 2 Watcher in the Webs can both double block 2 creatures. That is not fun. The card itself is like a C+. It's pretty solid, but it is not going to be a fun card to play against. Weirding Wood. Oh, it's Weird Wood. 2 and a green, enchant land. When it enters the battlefield, investigate. So by itself back, and enchant land taps to provide 2 mana of any one color. D-mana pool. So it's mana fixing, and it gives the card back. I actually like this pretty well. If you need the mana fixing, you need a small amount of wrap. It does well. I think it'll be good in the investigate decks, just because they want more mana in general, and it gives them another clue. So it's probably like a C- overall, but it fits pretty well in that specific deck. All right. Let's wrap this up with just a little bit left. Multicolored cards. These are all very powerful, and I think they're all rares and mythics, unless I'm mistaken. Altered Ego is X2 green blue. It can't be countered. It copies a creature when it comes into play and has X1/1 counters. That card's really good. All the double color cards, you do need to be aware that you're taking a card that you have to commit to do colors, so there's a little bit of a grade reduction because of that. But I've got Altered Ego at a B. It's a card I'd be happy to go into blue-green for. Takes their best creature, makes a bigger version of it. Pretty solid. Anguished Unmaking is 1 black-white. Instant, exile target non-land permanent. You lose 3 life. That's an A-. It's amazingly efficient. The 3 life is important, but whatever you're getting rid of is well worth 3 life. And it can get rid of anything. Like, there's not much to say about this card other than the efficiency is just through the roof. You should always run it, and I would go to lengths, moderate lengths, to splash for it, but not great lengths. It's only an A because of the efficiency. Fevered Visions is 1 blue-red enchantment. At the beginning of each player's end step, that player draws a card. So you draw your card first. That player's your opponent and has 4 more cards in hand. Fevered Visions deals 2 damage to him or her. It's okay. You both draw a card. It's not doing too terribly much. I'd have to have a weird deck to want to run it, so I'm kind of down on this. I think it's more of a build around, and I'm not just happy to play it. The Gitrog monster! Yeah, the Gitrog monster! 3 green black for a 6/6 death touch, just in case your 6/6 couldn't kill something. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice it unless you sack a land. Well, things are looking kind of bad here. You may pay additional land on each turn. That's not a great ability in limited. Whenever one more land is put to your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. Oh, well, that's a lot better. Now it cycles your lands for more cards. So you could easily end up in a situation turning all of your excess lands into more cards. I think that the Gitrog monster is strong without being amazing. I don't think I would first pick it and expect the deck to come together well. I do like that it plays well in Delirium. I do like that it's super grindy. I do like it that it's a big threat that they have to answer. But all of that aside, I don't know if the payoff is so high that I want to give this an A. I think it's simply just a B or a B-. There are situations where this card does not turn out great. And it doesn't really have evasion in that your opponent will probably just chump block. You will eventually win if that's the case because you are generating extra cards. Usually you're trading lands for non-land cards, which over the course of the game will be a winning strategy. So maybe it is just a B. Invocation of Saint Traft is 1 blue-white enchant creature. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, put a 4/4 white angel token onto the battlefield. Attacked and tapping, exiled into combat. This is the kind of war I can get behind. This kind of war is like, oh, you need to answer it right now or you're going to lose the game. You're not going to lose the game in like 3 or 4 turns. You're going to lose the game in like 2 or 3 turns. You just throw this on a flying spirit token or a creature with skulk and you're going to get there. It doesn't give any power or toughness, but it does put a lot of more damage out against your opponent. So I actually like this quite a bit. That said, I don't think I can go much higher than a C+ for this kind of aura. Nari the Harbinger is 2 red-white for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, +2. You may discard a card if you do draw a card. Madness Enabler, card selection, powerful ability. -2, exile target enchantment, tapped artifact, or tapped creature. Gets rid of their creatures that are attacking and blocking. I like Nahiri. She's an A-. I think she's the worst planeswalker of this set, and I still think she's amazing. So there's that. She's just super strong. I would pick Jace over her. A lot of that has to do with him being single-colored, and that makes a really big difference. Olivia, mobilized for war, 1 black-red for a 3/3 flying. Hey, I'm sold. That's good enough on its own. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield in your control, you may discard a card. If you do, put a 1/1 counter on it, it gains haste, and becomes a vampire. Okay, so you can activate Madness. It plays well with Vampire Tribal, and it's a 3/3 fly for 3. That's great. The only thing keeping this from being an A as well is the multicolored position of it. Like, I don't feel comfortable giving multicolored cards A's unless they're super ridiculous, and I don't think Olivia's quite there. I think she's a solid B+. I'd be happy to first pick her, but you won't always play her because of the 2-coloredness of it all. Prized Amalgamon, 1 blue-black for a 3/3, so 3 mana for a 3/3, solid. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it enters from the graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, return Prized Amalgam from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of the next step. Next end step. That's solid. It comes back multiple times. You only have to get it back once or twice for it to be really good, because it's essentially a free 3/3 each time you cast a card from your graveyard. There are some blue cards and black cards that work really well with this. It can be a linchpin in that strategy. It's really grindy. So Prized Amalgam is pretty solid. I think it's another one of those cards that I can't really push it up much higher because of the cost. Costing 1 blue-black means that it's not something you can easily play early, too. You need to be a blue-black deck, and you don't want to be splashing blue or black unless you have ways to get into your graveyard, so it's just a B. Sigarda, Heron's Grace, 3 green-white for a 4/5 flying. Legendary Creature Angel. You and humans you control have hexproof. That's fine without being great. 2, exile a card from your graveyard, put a 1/1 human onto the battlefield. So that human has hexproof as well, which is a pretty big boon. It allows you to sort of cast combat tricks, enchantments, equipment, without much worry at all. And a 5 mana, 4/5 flying on its own is already pretty solid as well. The two-coloredness of it means that I'm not going to go as high as I normally would, but I think that that's another B out here. Another card that I'm really happy to play. Sorin Grim Nemesis is 4 white black for a 6 loyalty planeswalker. +1, reveal the top card of your library. Put it in your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to its converted mana cost. So +1 that gets you cards and kills your opponent. That's a good ability. You don't need much more for this card already to be somewhere in the A's. -X, it deals X to target creature planeswalker. You gain X life. Protects itself. Gains you life. -9, put a 1/1 black lifelink vampire onto the battlefield equal to the highest life total of all players. So if your opponent has 20 life, you get 21 ones. They all have lifelink. You're going to win the game. I think Sorin is... I think Sorin is an A+. He might just be an A. It's hard to say. The two-colorless is a tricky spot, but most games you play him, he will either be stopping your opponent from doing something meaningful by killing their best card and gaining you a bunch of life, up to 6 power or toughness, gaining you cards and making your opponent lose the game, and you probably won't be using the ultimate that often, but if you do, you're just going to win the game anyway. Like, all his abilities are just game-winning. Artifacts. Brain in the Jar we can skip. That's for constructed only. Corrupted Graphstone is 2 colorless. Enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to choose a color of a card in your graveyard and add 1 mana to your mana pool of that color. I don't think that's good enough. It's too hard to get cards in your graveyard to have inconsistent ramp. So, I'm out on the Graphstone. I don't think it's playable. Epitaph Golem is 5 for a 3/5. Sure, that's like a C-. 2 colors, put target creature from your graveyard. Put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. I could run on one of these main board as just a way to prevent my opponent from milling me, but that's really all it's doing. Unless you have ways to search up cards, there's not much else going on here. You can't do it to your opponent, which would prevent them from having Delirium, and that's really the only thing I'd be interested in. So, it's just a C-. It's a fine C-. Explosive Apparatus is 1, 3, tap, sack it, deal 2 damage to target creature or player. It gets an artifact in your graveyard. And the artifact in your graveyard is a pretty important effect, actually. Sorry. The artifact in your graveyard is pretty important for Delirium. And the fact that you have some moderately bad instant speed removal is a decent upside to go with that as well. That said, I don't think I'm going to run it often. I really don't have the Explosive Apparatus above C-. Don't want to run it. If you really need Delirium, you'll run it more often. Haunted Cloak is 3 to cast. Equipped creature gets Vigilance, Trample, and Haste for 1 mana. I don't like equipment that doesn't give power or toughness. It gives Haste and Vigilance, which is decent without being great. I think I'm just at a D+ on this equipment that doesn't do enough. I'll run it if I have enough equipment cares cards. That's about it. Magnifying Glass is 3 colorless. Tap to add a colorless. So it's ramp. If you need a ramp strategy, that's fine. 4 colorless to investigate. It's a very, very slow card advantage engine. I think it's worse than just scrying for less mana. But if your deck cares about investigating, or you need a mana sink, or you need ramp, it is serviceable. But I think overall we see another card that falls into that C-, D+. I just don't normally want to play at camp. Murderer's Axe is 4 to cast. Equip creature gets +2/+2, and equip is discard a card. I think that's fine. I think you're not going to normally run it if you're in a very aggressive deck that wants madness effects, because this is free madness effect. You can equip it as many times as you want, even to the same creature, just to get madness, right? So I can have 1 creature, or I can have 2 creatures out, and I can re-equip the same creature 1 time by discarding 1 card to activate my Fiery Temper, which is nice, or Delirium. But I don't think you'll play it outside of that, and I don't think it's a particularly high pick. I think it's like a D+ that fits really, or sorry, like a D that fits really well in 1 archetype. Runaway Carriage is 4 for a 5/6 with Trample. Whenever it attacks or blocks, sacrifice at the end of the combat. I don't like one-time effects like this. I would have to have some way to take advantage of that power and toughness outside of combat to even want to run it. So it's like a D-. Shard of Broken Glass is 1 to play, 1 to equip. Equipped creature gets +1/+0. And whenever attacks, you mill yourself 2. So it is an early Delirium enabler. I actually like it quite a bit in that kind of setup. I think that's only the place where it really shines, or in the decks that care about equipments quite a bit. So I've got Shard of Broken Glass at like a D+ / fits into archetype decks. Skeleton Key, 1 to equip. Or sorry, 1 to play, 2 to equip. So equipped creature has Skulk. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. It's an enabler card. It doesn't give any power toughness. It does let you filter through looting. It does let you activate Madness. It does let you use Delirium. But all that said, I think overall it's still not a great card. I've got it at a, again, D+, D level. Just equipment that don't do a good job aren't very good, because the first time you play them and try to equip them, often your opponent will kill that creature if it's relevant. So you usually have to pay double the equip cost to get your first effect. That's a realistic way to look at those kind of equipped cards and see why I'm so slow or so low rated on them. Slider's Plate is 3 to play and 3 to equip. Equipped creature gets +4/+2. Okay, 3 mana is a lot. +4/+2 is a lot of power and toughness, so I could play this, although I will not normally play this. When equipped creature dies, if it's a human, you get a 1/1 spirit. End of the battlefield. Now I like it more. If I have a decent amount of humans, I'd put this somewhere around a C. I wouldn't pick it highly, but I would play the first one. If I don't have humans, I need a reason to want +4/+2, whether that's flying spirits, which makes me like it, or something else. I do like that Slayer's Plate plays well with spirits. You can play human, they kill the human, you put the spirit, you put the equipment onto the spirit. Now your spirit is a 5/3. That's pretty threatening, but it is a big mana cost. Tamio's Journal is 5. At the beginning of your upkeep, investigate, sacrifice 3 clues, search your library for a card, put it in your hand. Okay, so I guess the question is investigate each turn worth it? And I don't think it's worth 5 mana. I don't think Tamio's Journal on its own is worth 5 mana. I think if you have a deck that has an overabundance of clues, you could make use of Tamio's Journal, but I just don't think it's worth a card slot. I think it's a build around, and I think it's like a D+ build around. I think it goes in the blue-green clue deck, and I think it goes poorly in it. True Faith Censor is 2 to play and 2 to equip. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 in vigilance, and as long as it's human, it gets +1/+0. So humans get +2/+1, and I think that's where you need to be looking at. If you have enough humans that it's pretty consistently +2/+1, the card seems solid. I would probably put that card somewhere around a C, and I would put just +1/+1 in vigilance around a D. So you've really got to make sure that you've got the human creatures for it to be good enough. Wicker Witch is 3 for a 3/1 artifact creature Scarecrow. So at first blush, this just seems like a bad card. 3 mana 3/1's not great. I don't want to run that card. But it's an artifact creature, so it's 2 types for your Delirium. And that's where this card shines. Wicker Witch is 2 types for your Delirium, and that's with the emphasis. If you want Delirium quickly, Wicker Witch does a good job there. That's the only reason to run her. So in a Delirium deck, she's probably like a C, or I would run the first 1 or 2. Outside of that, I would prefer not to run any. Wildfield Scarecrow is 3 for 1/4 Defender. You can pay 2 and sack it, search your library for 2 lands, and put them into your hand. I like this better than Wicker Witch because it does the same thing. It gets an artifact and a creature into my graveyard for Delirium. It blocks well, which Wicker Witch also does. And it also gets me more lands. So it does a little bit of everything. I think this card's much better. I have this card at a C+, possibly a B-. It gets you a lot of resources and a lot of small advantages, and I think those all combined together create a really solid card. Alright, let's go on to the lands, and then we'll hit Double-Faced. The 2 color lands of both types, whether they're the allied or the enemy ones, I think fall at the same place, which is I usually keep playing somewhere around a B-. I think in this set they're closer to a C+, because you're usually playing 2 colors. If you're running 3 colors, they're like a B or a B-. Drown Yard Temple taps for colors, and you can pay 3 to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So it can ramp you if you can get into your graveyard. It's a kind of free-ish card to discard as well. The Madness or Mill, but I don't think it's great. I don't think most decks will want to get more mana out of their graveyard. Let's see if there's anything else. Warped Landscape taps for a colorless, so it taps when you need it to tap, and you can pay 2 and get a basic land. 2 tap and sack and get a basic land to put in play tapped. I'm not too big on this either. If for some reason you're running a 3-color deck where one of the colors is a super light splash, maybe I would run it then, but outside of that, I'm just real low on this. It's like a C- for me. Alright, I think that's it for lands. So let's finish up with dual-faced cards. Double-faced cards. Alright, Avacyn is 3 white for a 4/4 flash flying vigilance. Okay, well that's already like a B+. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain indestructible until turn. Okay, now it's a great combat trick that blows your opponent out. When a non-angel creature you control dies, transform it at the beginning of the next upkeep, and it transforms into Avacyn the Purifier, which is a 6/5 flyer, and it deals 3 damage to each other creature and each opponent. The flipping is actually not always a benefit. I think I'd rather have a 4/4 flying vigilance than a 6/5 flying non-vigilance. But it gets rid of a lot of the smaller creatures. You can still block with it and maybe other creatures. It is likely to eventually flip. So try to get rid of your small creatures quickly. It's going to kill many, many creatures. I think this card is an A- just on the front side. I actually think that flipping is more of a downside than an upside often. But you can orchestrate situations where you flip and kill an opponent's very large board. Actually, Avacyn might just be an A. I think it's just an A. There's so much advantage from just having a 5/5 flying vigilance flash. You're going to get so many cards out of that. Abyssinian Missionaries is 3 and a white for a 3/3. At the beginning of your end step, if it's equipped, transform it. And when it transforms, you may exile another target creature until it leaves the battlefield, and it's a 4/4. The equipment stays on it. And this is a reason to play equipment. Being able to just play and get this equipped immediately for 1 mana means that you're going to have, if you did it with the Shard of Glass, your 4/3 becomes 5/4 on the first turn you play it, and you exile the best creature. That's really strong. There's a little bit of setup work here, so I'm going to leave this just at a C+. It's really good when it flips. It's merely mediocre when it doesn't. Hanawar Militia Captain is 1 and a white for a 2/2. That's already solid. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more creatures, transform it. So you only need 3 other creatures. Not too hard to do. It becomes a Westville Cult Leader. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. And at the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 black and white human cleric onto the battlefield. So if you have 3 other creatures, it's a 2/2. It flips into a 4/4, and then at the end of each turn, you get another card to go with it. So it grows and grows and grows. I like this on both sides. For me, it's probably a B. Maybe it's a B+ because it keeps growing throughout the game and it's a must-kill threat. Yeah, I actually kind of like B+, but you do have to get a board out for it to really pay you off. Pious Evangel is 2 and white for a 2/2. Whenever Pious Evangel or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1. 2 tap and sack it. 2 tap and sack another permanent. Transform it. So that's in land. That helps out with the ability to activate Delirium. And it plays well with tokens because you gained a bunch of life. And whenever Wayward Disciple or another target creature you control dies, target opponent loses 1, you gain 1. And it's a 2/4. So it's pretty solid there. I actually think this is another one of these. I think I have it a B, but it might just be a B-. But the fact that you can leverage your extra creatures into win condition is a pretty big deal, and it's a 2/4, so it's quite sturdy. Town Gossipmonger is white for a 1/1. Tap it and tap an untapped creature you control, transform it, and it becomes inside Rabble. It's a 2/3. It attacks each combat of Fable, and you can pay 2 to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. I'm not excited about it. I don't think it's particularly great. Being forced to attack is a pretty big downside. The active ability is an upside. You only have to be able to activate it twice to make it pretty hard to block. So if you're in a really aggressive deck, it can be fine, but I'm mostly down on it. I'm going to go ahead and give it a C-. It can be very good in certain decks. Aberrant Researcher is 3 and a blue for a 3/2 flying. You can tell that it is the flipped version of Delver of Secrets. And at the beginning of your upkeep, put the top card of your library into your graveyard. If it's an instant or sorcery, transform it. So it's helping with Delirium some right here. Into Perfected Form, which is a 5/4 flying. So it grows one more time. It's the last form of Delver, which is kind of cool. Perfected Form. So a 4-mana 3/2 flyer is fine. That's like a C or a C+. And the chance for it to become 5/4 is pretty solid too. So I think it's like a C+, B-. I'm actually really happy with this card. You're not often going to flip over an instant or sorcery without any deck manipulation because you're not running that many. But when you do, it becomes an excellent card. And even before you flip it, it's a fine card. Alright, these flip cards. There we go. Daring Sleuth is 1 in the blue for a 2/1. When you sacrifice a clue, transform it, which is not too hard to do. Barrow of Overwhelming Truths. Prowess. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, investigate. That's fine. I think it's a fine card without being a great card. Like, sure, when it does combat damage, you're going to investigate. Prowess does help it get through somewhat. But you're not usually going to sacrifice a clue early that often. So I think it's merely like a C or maybe a C+. Startled Awake is a really good card for limited. 2 blue for a sorcery mythic. Target opponent mills 13. That might just kill them on its own. Maybe. 3 in a blue. Put it onto the battlefield. Transform. Do this only as a sorcery. It's a 1/1 Skulk. When it deals combat damage to a player, return it to its owner's hand. So you get a recurring creature, and this creature can block, which is nice that you can basically make a blocker for 5 if you absolutely have to. But more importantly, it usually attacks. If your opponent doesn't have a 0 or 1 power creature, it's going to hit, and you're going to mill them another 13 cards. At that point, your opponent is likely dead within 2 or 3 turns because you milled 26 cards and they drew about 13. So 13 plus 13 plus 13 is like, 39 of the 40 cards they're running. So it's not putting them in a great spot. Startled Awake, I think, is a B. It might be a B+. It might be higher than that. I'm not super confident on putting it above a B, just because there are ways to interact with it. But it is the kind of card that's very hard to fight against. Thing in the Ice is 1 in a blue for an 0/4 defender. Okay. It has 4 ice counters. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you remove an ice counter. If it has no ice counters, transform it. So you have to cast 4 instant sorceries, which is not easy to do in limited. But it becomes a 7/8, and it bounces all non-horror creatures, which is a pretty powerful effect. The good news about this card is just playing an 0/4 blocker isn't terrible, and in some of the slower, more instants and sorcery speed decks, that'll be pretty solid on its own. And when you do get to flip it, you have a legitimate win condition. All that said, most of the time it's just an 0/4 that has the threat to flip in several turns, but it probably won't flip till like turn 8 or 9 at the earliest. So I've got it, I think I've got it like a C or C-, D+. It's usually just a 0/4 for 2, which I don't think is great. Uninvited Guest is Uninvited Geist. It's a good joke. It's 2 in a blue for a 2/2 Skulk. When it deals damage, transform it. That's not too hard to get through that damage either. Your opponent will probably have to double block to kill it. And it becomes Unimpeded Trespasser, which is a 3/3 that can't be blocked. It's a fairly powerful card. All it has to do is get through one time to be a significant threat for your opponent to deal with. Unblockable 3 damage will end the game pretty quickly. So I think Unimpeded Trespasser is sitting around a C+, B minus for me actually. It's such a big threat the first time it gets through. Accursed Witch is 4 and a black for a 4/2 human shaman. Spells your opponent's cast that target Accursed Witch cost 1 less to cast. When it dies, return to the battlefield transformed, attached to your opponent. So it's got a sort of morbid trigger, and it has a curse, which is kind of cool. They brought curses back. I like that flavorfully. Infectious Curse, enchanted player. Spells you cast that target that player cost 1 less. So that's an okay but not particularly relevant ability. At the beginning of enchanted player's life, drain 1. It's also fine. So we're really asking how good is a 4/2 for 4 that has an upside when it dies, and I think it's fine. You can usually trade a card, and once you're draining 1 a turn, you're not in an awful position. I don't think it's any higher than probably have it a C+. I like that the 4/2 can trade with one of their better creatures early on, or one of their worst creatures, and then you're draining them. You have to drain them about 4 times for it to be a fairly worth it card, but that's not that many turns. Elusive Tormentor is 2 black for a 4/4. Okay, well that's already like a B, or a B minus. 1 discard a card, transform it. Insidious Mist, hexproof, indestructible, can't block and can't be blocked. When it attacks and isn't blocked, you may pay 4 and transform it. So you can transform it to like get through extra damage, but more importantly, you can transform it from the vampire side to get rid of removal spells. It's really hard to attack through, it's really hard to defend against because of the ability to give it hexproof by just paying 1 and discarding a card. Also, if you are running any sort of auras or whatever, they stay on both sides. So you can attack with just Insidious Mist as a 2/3, repeatedly, unblockable, hexproof, indestructible. So that's always a nice bonus as well. Heir of Falkenrath is one of the enabler cards for the super aggressive decks. 1 and a black for a 2/1. It's acceptable without being great. Discard a card. Transform it. Activate this once a turn. Becomes Heir of the Night, which is a flying 3/2. So a combo people are talking about a lot is turn 2, play Heir of Falkenrath. Turn 3, discard Incorrigible Youths, and you're attacking with a 4/3 on the ground and a 3/2 in the air, which is pretty powerful. It's an enabler card. I think it's a C+. I think it's going to be picked pretty highly, and you'll run any number of these that you'd like in that deck. I think outside of the Madness decks, it'll merely be decent because it's a 2/1 early that later on you can discard an irrelevant card like a land to make into a 3/2. Kindly Stranger is that old lady that sells you cookies. She's a nice little old lady. And for 2 and a black, she's a 2/3. Delirium, pay 2 and a black, transform her. So you can only transform her if you have Delirium. And if you do have Delirium, you can transfer her into a mean lady that has less cookies and is a 4/3. Just pretty solidly big, and when it transforms, you destroy target creature, which is another powerful effect. Depends on how easily you can get Delirium. Without Delirium, I don't know. I don't want to play a 3-mana 2/3. So without Delirium, she's a C-, and with Delirium, she's a B or a B+, probably a B. So she's like a C+ overall. Breakneck Rider. Oh, these are color-coded, okay. Is 1 red for a 3/3. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast, transform it. And it becomes a 4/3, which is fine. Attacking creatures you control get +1/+0 and have trample. And it has the werewolf ability at the beginning of each upkeep. If a player casts 2 or more spells, transform it back. So Neckbreaker is putting a lot of pressure on your opponents on the attacking side. It attacks as a 5/3 on its own. 3-mana 3/3 is solid, and the fact that it becomes a 5/3 attacker and can give your other creatures benefits as well. Makes it quite good. I think this is a solid B. It's one of the big reasons to be in red for me. Convicted Killer is 2 in red for a 2/2. At the beginning, let's see if I can just... Yeah. Oh, come on. Yeah. At the beginning of upkeep, transform it. It has the Werewolf Claws. It goes from a 3-mana 2/2 to a 3-mana 4/4. It's fine without being great. I think overall it's just worse than a 3-mana 2/3. I think it's a C-. I think I'm not going to be happy to run it usually, unless I'm running a Werewolf deck. Get Staff Arsonists is 4 and a red for a 5/4. I'm happy with this card already. I'd be happy to run the first one. It's a C right there. Transforms over to a 6/5. Not a big gain on the stats, but it also gains Menace, which I think is a really big deal because it makes it hard to block. So it goes from a C for me to I think a B-. It's the 5/4 that I want to run. Or sorry, it's the 5-mana card that I want to run in most decks. Greer Reach Bandit is 2 in red for a 3/2 haste. That's impressive. It's a werewolf. Whenever a werewolf enters the battlefield under your control, you may transform it. So that means you play your creature, it hits the battlefield, it immediately transforms if you want it to, which is a super powerful ability. I think that this is a B+. I think it, just on the front side of being a 3/2 haste for 3, is like a B- or a C+. And the backhand puts it up that much further in that your werewolf deck goes from strong to extremely potent. Kessig Forgemaster is 1 in a red for a 2/1 werewolf, so it has the werewolf ability. And whenever it blocks or becomes blocked by a creature, it deals 1 damage to that creature. That's pretty good. It means it's hard to block. It kills 3 toughness creatures pretty well. It transforms into a 3/2. Then whenever it's blocked or blocks, it does 2 damage to that creature. So now it can kill a 5 power creature pretty well. So I think that this is another solid B-. It's going to do a lot of work very often. Skin Invasion. Enchantment for red. Enchanted creature attacks each combat if able. When it dies, flip this card. Or I think you unattach it. Yeah, return this to the battlefield. Flipped, and it becomes a 3/4. So this is obviously a card that goes in an aggressive deck. You play it on one of your opponent's creatures. Now their creature has to attack past your creature every turn, and if their creature dies for any reason, you get a 3/4. It's supposed to be the kind of Delver of Secrets type card for this set. It's a little bit more situational. It's a little tough to use, but I think overall I'd be very happy to play it. I'm going to start it out at a C+. A 3/4 is very relevant for the majority of the game. There's very few board states where a 3/4 wouldn't be a pretty strong bonus with the other cards you add. Village Messenger is red for a 1/1 haste. It's a werewolf. And when it flips, it becomes a 2/2 menace. I'm not excited to run this card, and I probably won't. Even in a werewolf deck, I think I'm out on the Village Messenger, so for me, it's just a D-. Autumnal Gloom is 2 and a green. Enchantment. Black, put the top card of your library into your graveyard. Delirium, flip this card. So it's a good card for activating Delirium. That's really what this card has going on for it. It becomes a 4/4 Trample Hexproof. The problem I have with this card is you're spending a lot to get a 4/4 Trample Hexproof. And how much would I pay for a 4/4 Trample Hexproof? And the answer is I would pay 5. And I think I'm going to have to pay more than 5 mana on average to get that. So I think that this card is like a C-, a D+. I think I'm going to have to pay more mana than I want to too often to get the 4/4 Trample Hexproof. So I would rather not play this card unless I had a very easy access to Delirium. Dusk Watch Recruiter. Let's go ahead and pull this down just a little bit more. Too much. Yeah, we can do it. We can do it. Well, that's sure. 1 and a green for 2/2. Werewolf. Alright. I'm already happy. 1 and a green for a 2/2 werewolf is pretty solid. 3 and a green. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from them. Put it in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in any order. So it's usually 2 and a green, get a creature card. You almost never not have a creature card in the top 3 cards of your library. It's very rare. It happens on the smallest of occasions. So it's a 2/2 that draws you a card fairly frequently. That card's already like a C+. And it flips into a 3/3. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. If you cast 2 more spells, then you flip it. So it has 2 abilities. It can stock up extra cards, which allows it to flip easily because you use that ability instead of casting spells. And then when you have multiple creatures in hand, you can cast multiple creatures and flip it back over and do it again. Krellin Horde Howler and Duskwatch Recruiter is one of the most interesting cards we've seen in a long time, and I think it's actually quite good. I think it's a solid B. I think it's going to do a lot of good work in getting you extra cards. It doesn't have to attack to provide you a lot of advantage. And later on in the game, you can just play a spell each turn and tap the 3 to keep drawing cards every turn. Hermit of the Natternolls is 2 and a green for a 2/3. So it's a C- range. Whenever an opponent casts a spell during your turn, draw a card. That ability is moderately relevant without being great. It slows down. It stops most counter spells, and it stops most combat tricks. So you can attack into a board knowing fairly well that your opponent's tricks will be much worse. It transforms into a 3/5, so it's much, much more sturdy. And whenever your opponent casts a spell during your turn, you draw 2 cards. So if you let this flip and you attack into your opponent's board, they're heavily incentivized not to play tricks, because the tricks end up usually gaining them tempo and losing them cards. And that's a great place to be. So for the Hermit of the Natternolls, I think I'm going to give it a B. And it seems kind of high, but cutting your opponent off from combat tricks is such a big advantage. Even if your opponent has to use just one combat trick. And it's only your opponent, so you can cast your combat trick. You can have a Lone Wolf, you can attack into their 2/3/3s, and you can play your combat trick. And even if they play a combat trick and get the 2 for 1 or the 1 for 1 or whatever it is, you get your 2 cards back. Alright. Hinterland Larger. 1 and a green for a 2/1 with a werewolf ability. Becomes a 4/2 with trample. It's fine. It's just fodder. It's a 2 mana 2/1, transforms to something bigger. It's a C. Lambholt Pacifist is 1 and a green for a 3/3, and it can't attack unless you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So that side of the card is like a C-. This is probably like a D. Lambholt Butcher is a 4/4. I like how it flips, I like how it transforms, but I just don't like cards that can't always attack. The fact they can always block is nice. I'm gonna go ahead and put it a C-. I would rather not run this than run it in most decks. Sage of Ancient Lore is 4 and a green for a star. Power toughness equal to the number of cards in your hand. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. You do need a card when you cast this. If you have no cards, it'll die, and then you'll draw a card. And that is bad. At the beginning of your upkeep, it flips or if you haven't cast any spells. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast that turn, transform it. It has a werewolf ability because it's a werewolf. And it has vigilance and trample. And its power and toughness are equal to the number of all cards in all players' hands. Still not that great. Usually when you cast your 5-drop, this thing's going to be like a 2/2 or a 3/3. With your opponent's hands, maybe it's a 4/4 or 5/5. I don't think there's enough payoff. The drawing a card is really the only thing that entices me, but I'm out. It's like a D. Solitary Hunter is 3 and a green for a 3/4 werewolf. And when it flips, it's a 5/6. So the interesting part about this card is it's a werewolf with very little upside when it flips, but it's already very good before it flips. Like a 3/4 for 4 is like a C+. I'm already running that card every time. And the fact that sometimes it becomes a 5/6 is good enough. I don't need anything else. This, this card could go from a 3/4 to a 4/5, and it would still be good enough at 4. So that's pretty exciting. So I think overall it's a B-. Arlen Cord is 2 red green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. You get +1 to give up to 1 target creature. +2/+2 vigilance and haste, which is a great ability. That's going to win you most combat. It's going to mean that your creature can attack and block, and it's going to create 4/4s, 5/5s, 6/6s fairly often. 0. Put a 2/2 wolf creature into the battlefield and transform it. So it can protect itself, it can build an army, and on the other side, +1, creatures you control get +1/+1, and trample. So an overrun effect, help you win the game pretty quickly. You can't do it out of nowhere, your opponent will know it's coming, but they may not have enough time to prepare. And -1, you can deal 3 damage to target creature player, transform it back. So you can alternate between bolting creatures and getting 2/2s, which is pretty powerful. And -6, creatures you control have haste and tap, deal damage equal to their power to target creature player. So you get that invul, which is fine. It won't happen too often, but when it does, you win the game. I think Arlen Cord is another A+. She's a planeswalker with a lot of creature-oriented abilities. All 4 of her main abilities are great limited and are very hard to beat. I don't think there'll be many games where you play a turn 4 Arlen Cord that you will lose. Harvest Hands is 3 for a 2/2 artifact creature Scarecrow. When it dies, return to the battlefield, transform under your control. And it becomes an equipment. Equip creature, or +2, or 2 to equip. Equip creature gets +1/+1. As long as it's a human, it has menace. So it's like the reverse of Living Weapon. Living Weapons were pretty good. I think this card will be pretty good. If it somehow gets milled or they destroy your artifact, then it does count as an artifact creature for your mill effects. But usually, it's just a decent creature that trades, hopefully, and becomes an equipment later. So hopefully it's like a 1.5 for 1, which I think is pretty solid. I actually have this at the highest of all the equipments that we've covered so far. I think I have it at a C+. Neglected Heirloom is 1. Equip creature gets +1/+1. Equip 1. When equip creature transforms, you transform it. Equip creature gets +3/+3 in first strike. Equip 3. If I had 6 equip creatures, I would run this, and it would be good. Otherwise, I would not run this. That's where it's at. I think it's a D equipment. This is one that I either don't want to run at all, or I'm fairly happy running because I have enough transform cards. Thrabbing Gargoyle is 1 for 2/2 defender and 6 to transform it. I think it's pretty good if you need more defensive oomph, but this is already just, on this side, a card that I'm going to put in as a sideboard card. It transforms into a 4/2 flyer. The only time I'm going to mainboard this is if I'm in a really slow deck. A really slow deck could run Thrabbing Gargoyle just to slow down the game, but I think 9 times out of 10 you're just pulling it in the board against you're pulling it from sideboard into the main board against the really aggressive decks. Westvale Abbey is a land that, as a colorless, pay 5, tap it, pay 1 life, put a 1/1 black and white creature token into play. That's fine. Pay 5, sack 5 creatures, transform this, and untap it. You get Ormindahal, Profane Prince, which is flying, lifelink, indestructible haste, and 9/7. So there's a lot of abilities. It's a fairly big creature. Will win you the game when you play it, and it's a land. And that's the thing I like most about this. It's a land that makes creatures, and it's a land that becomes a threat. So I'm giving this an A-, and it's not because the card is overtly powerful, but because the card asks so little of you. It asks you for a land spot. And a land spot you have the most of. Your lands are very free to have strong effects. There's not many other lands with strong effects in the set, and this is probably one of the best lands that I can remember in a long time getting printed. It makes creatures at the cost of a lot of mana and a little life, and eventually can turn those creatures into a powerful effect. Alright guys, that wraps us up. I'm going to take a little bit of a break because my voice is killing me here. Thanks for joining us here at Mobius.